There are infinite universes where hope dies. Infinite timelines where the Man of Steel breaks under the weight of grief and becomes something darker than the villains he once fought. But in the quantum foam between realities, one constant remains. For every Superman who falls into darkness, there exists a Superman who endures, who holds the line no matter the cost. The Injustice universe learned this truth the day the sky split open above Gotham City, and two gods prepared to wage war for humanity's soul. The dimensional breach tore through reality like a wound in space-time itself, crackling with speed force energy and the lingering signature of a monitor's intervention. Batman stood atop a condemned building in Gotham's ruins, one of the few structures the regime's reconstruction hadn't yet sanitized, watching the anomaly expand. 5 years of fighting. Superman's totalitarian peace had taught him to recognize opportunity when the universe provided it. This wasn't a boom tube, not a phantom zone rupture. Something far more significant was crossing over. The figure that emerged from the breach moved with impossible grace, cape billowing in the dimensional winds, the iconic S-shield catching the gray morning light. For a moment, one terrible, hope-crushing moment, Bruce Wayne thought the regime had somehow gained another Superman. Then the visitor's eyes met his across the distance, and Bruce saw something he hadn't witnessed in 5 years. Compassion. The Superman who descended into Gotham's shadows landed gently, his boots touching broken concrete with the care of someone who valued every life, every structure, every fragment of the world he protected. He looked around at the cities carefully. Controlled decay, the regime permitted just enough poverty in designated zones to remind citizens what they'd escaped, and his jaw tightened with recognition. This wasn't the first authoritarian state he'd witnessed, but his eyes suggested it might be the most personal. "You're not him," Batman said, emerging from the shadows with the caution of a man who'd planned Superman's death 1,000 times but never found the will to execute it. "You're Superman, but you're not him. Clark Kent." Kal-El. The visitor's voice carried the weight of authority tempered by humility, a tone Bruce hadn't heard from his former friend in half a decade. "I'm from a universe where the Joker tried the same plan, where he tried to break me by taking everything I love." His hands clenched into fists, cape settling around shoulders that bore the same burden as the Tyrant's, but hadn't buckled. "I didn't let him." The admission hung between them like a prayer in a cathedral of ruins. Batman's hand moved away from the kryptonite trigger at his belt, one of 7 redundancies he maintained, all useless against his worlds. Superman, but potentially effective against this visitor. If this was a trick, it was the cruelest one yet. If it was genuine. "He killed Lois," Bruce said, testing. "Destroyed Metropolis. 7 million dead because." The Joker spiked his adrenaline with fear. Toxin and kryptonite dust made him think she was doomsday. Clark killed her himself, killed their unborn child, and the nuclear failsafe triggered. The visitor's expression shattered with empathetic agony. "In my world, we stopped him 30 seconds earlier." 30 seconds, Bruce. That's the difference between the symbol of hope and he looked up at the sky, where regime surveillance drones hummed their eternal watch, and a god who decided humanity needed a master instead of an inspiration. "He calls it peace," Batman said, acid in his voice. "No crime, no war, no dissent. The regime ended conflict by ending choice." He stepped closer, cowl hiding everything except the grim determination in his eyes. "He killed the Joker with his bare hands in front of millions. Told the world it was justice. Half the planet celebrated. The other half learned to pretend they did." The visitor's heat vision flickered for just an instant, a micro-expression of rage, quickly mastered. "And you've been fighting him ever since. You and whoever's left of the real Justice League." "The insurgency," Bruce confirmed. "We're terrorists now. Freedom fighters. Threats to global stability. Take your pick." He produced a small device from his utility belt, not a weapon, but a communicator. Diana sided with him. So did Hal, before Clark executed him for choosing Guy Gardner over the regime. Flash runs Clark's errands, though I think Barry's starting to remember who he used to be. Cyborg maintains the surveillance state. Aquaman maintains neutrality in the oceans, which means he chose order over justice. "And you need help stopping him," the visitor said, understanding immediately. We need more than that. Batman's voice carried the exhaustion of 5 years, fighting an unwinnable war. We need proof that Superman didn't have to become this, that the choice he made wasn't inevitable. He met those compassionate eyes directly. We need you to beat him without becoming him. Because if you can't, if the only way to stop regime Superman is to match his brutality, then he's already won the argument. The visitor was silent for a long moment, processing the philosophical trap. Finally, he nodded. In my universe, when the Joker tried to break me, you were there to stop me from crossing the line. You've always been there, Bruce. My conscience in the shadows. A sad smile crossed his face. In this world, I wasn't listening, was I? You stopped listening the moment Lois's heart stopped beating. Then I'll listen now, the visitor said, extending his hand. To you. To whoever's left fighting for what Superman should represent. I don't know why the monitors, or the Speed Force, or whatever cosmic authority sent me here, but I know what I have to do. His grip was firm but gentle, the handshake of someone who remembered his own strength and chose restraint. I have to show this universe that power doesn't have to corrupt, that Superman can endure the worst loss imaginable and still choose hope. Batman's tactical mind was already racing through possibilities. An equally powerful Superman fighting for the insurgency changed everything. The regime's military superiority would be neutralized. Wonder Woman might be turned. The civilian populations. Fear could transform into genuine hope rather than Stockholm Syndrome acceptance of tyranny. But the risks. He'll see you as the ultimate threat, Bruce warned. Not because you're powerful, he's fought Kryptonians before, but because you're proof that he failed the test. That his choice to become a dictator wasn't the only option. He deactivated the kryptonite trigger at his belt. Permanently, a gesture of trust he hadn't made in 5 years. He'll try to kill you. And when that fails, he'll try to corrupt you. Show you that ruling the world is the only way to save it. That free will causes more suffering than control. Let him try. The visitor's eyes glowed faintly with contained heat vision, not a threat, but a promise. I've seen what I could become. Every hero has that nightmare. Bruce, the version of yourself that gives in to rage, grief, vengeance. The easy path. He looked at the surveillance drones again, then at the citizens moving through Gotham's streets with the mechanical precision of people who'd learned not to appear suspicious. But I also know that the moment you take that easy path, you're not Superman anymore. You're just another tyrant with good publicity. An alarm screamed through Batman's communicator, insurgency frequency, maximum priority. Diana's voice cut through the static. Bruce. Regime sensors detected a massive energy signature in Gotham. Clark's mobilizing. Whatever that anomaly was, he's coming to investigate personally. You have maybe 3 minutes. The visitor's expression hardened. Then let's not waste them. I need to know everything. Who's with the regime? Who's with the insurgency? Who's on the fence? The regime's power structure, vulnerabilities, civilian support levels, everything. His cape swirled as he prepared for flight. Because when I meet him, when I face the Superman I could have become, I need to be ready to prove that hope isn't naive, that the symbol still means something. Batman triggered the recall sequence for the insurgency's Gotham cell. There's a safe house 3 miles north. Old Wayne Enterprises facility the regime thinks they destroyed. He met those heroic eyes one more time, seeing the determination that his Superman had lost. But first, you need to understand something. The world you're trying to save? Half of it doesn't want to be saved. The regime ended war, famine, violent crime. People traded freedom for safety, and most of them think they got the better deal. Then I'll have to remind them what they lost. The visitor said quietly. Free will, the right to make mistakes, the dignity of choosing your own path, even if it's harder than submission. He rose into the air, hovering at Batman's level. In my universe, there's a saying we remember from Earth's darkest times. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Benjamin Franklin understood what your world forgot. In the distance, a sonic boom announced the regime Superman's approach. The Tyrant was coming to investigate the anomaly personally. The two Supermen would meet within moments. Hope confronting despair. Symbol facing its corruption. The Man of Steel about to discover that the universe still believed in second chances. even if he'd lost faith in himself. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. Batman's hand moved to his grapnel gun. When you meet him, remember, he thinks he's the hero. In his mind, every execution, every freedom stripped away, every dissident imprisoned was necessary to save humanity from itself. He's not a villain who knows he's evil. He's a hero who believes the ends justify the means. I know, the visitor said, turning toward the approaching sonic boom. Because part of me understands the temptation. That's what makes this so dangerous. His eyes glowed with determination and carefully controlled power. But understanding temptation and surrendering to it are different choices. He forgot that. I'm here to remind him. The sky above Gotham darkened as Regime Superman descended through the clouds, flanked by a squadron of regime enforcers. The hunt for the anomaly had just become personal, and in the ruins of a city that had once represented justice, two versions of the Man of Tomorrow prepared to show the universe what Superman truly meant. One through hope, the other through force. Only one could be right about what the symbol demanded. The regime Superman materialized above Gotham like a crimson and blue storm, his arrival marked by displaced air that rattled windows throughout the sector. 5 years of absolute authority had changed him in subtle ways. His posture carried the rigid perfection of a general inspecting occupied territory. His eyes swept the streets below with the cold assessment of a warden counting prisoners. The S-shield on his chest still symbolized hope. But in this universe, hope had been redefined as compliance. He wasn't alone. Wonder Woman descended beside him, her armor no longer ceremonial, but battle-scarred from years of enforcing peace at sword point. Behind them, 3 regime enforcers maintained formation, former heroes who traded ideals for order, their uniforms bearing the modified Superman emblem that marked them as extensions of the Tyrant's will. This wasn't an investigation. It was a show of force. The visitor rose from the ruins to meet them, positioning himself between the regime and Batman's escape route. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Wonder Woman's warrior instincts recognized the threat before her conscious mind processed the impossibility. The enforcers hesitated mid-flight, their certainty wavering, and regime Superman froze in the air, his heat vision charging unconsciously as his enhanced senses confirmed what his mind rejected. Another Kryptonian, another Superman, an exact duplicate down to the molecular structure. The way power flowed through alien cells drinking in yellow sun radiation. Impossible, yet undeniable. You're not Kryptonian, Regime Superman said finally, his voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to questions. You're a weapon, a genetic construct, something Luthor designed before. I made him understand cooperation. His eyes narrowed dangerously. Or you're from the Phantom Zone, a prisoner wearing my face. I'm Clark Kent, the visitor replied calmly, floating at precisely the same altitude, neither submissive nor aggressive, but equal. From a universe where the Joker tried the same plan, where he wanted to prove that one bad day could break anyone, even Superman. His voice carried across the ruins with perfect clarity. He was wrong. The words hit Regime Superman like a kryptonite blade. His expression flickered through confusion, recognition, denial, and finally settled on barely contained rage. Wonder Woman's hand moved to her sword, reading her lover's emotional state with the precision of years fighting beside him. The enforcers spread into combat formation automatically, awaiting the order that would inevitably come. Liar. Regime Superman's heat vision flared brighter. There is no universe where anyone could endure what I endured and remain weak. The word carried infinite contempt. You're a trick, a psychological weapon, Batman's most desperate play. Yet, he glanced toward where the Dark Knight had vanished into the shadows. It won't work. I've made peace with my choices. I've saved more lives in 5 years of the regime than the Justice League. Saved in 20 years of your failed idealism. How many of those lives did you save by taking away their freedom to choose? The visitor asked quietly. How many people live in your perfect peace? Because they're terrified of what happens if they step out of line. They're alive. Regime Superman descended slowly, aggression radiating from every movement. That's what matters. In my world, the real world, not whatever naive fantasy you crawled out of. People can't be trusted with freedom. They elect demagogues. They wage wars over resources and religions and tribal hatreds. They murder and steal and rape because no one has the power to stop them. His fists clenched. I have that power. I stopped it all. Every war, every murder, every senseless death that heroes like you were too weak to prevent. Wonder Woman moved closer to regime Superman, her presence a silent show-off. Solidarity. But the visitor noticed the way her eyes tracked between the two Kryptonians, the way her warrior's instincts assessed not just the threat but the deeper truth. She'd been raised on Themyscira, trained in battle and honor. She knew the difference between a warrior and a tyrant, even if she'd convinced herself her lover was still the former. Diana, the visitor said, addressing her directly. In my universe, you taught me that true strength isn't domination. It's restraint. That the warriors' code demands we fight for those who can't fight for themselves, not rule over them, for their own good. He met her gaze steadily. You taught me that anyone who says they need absolute power to do good has already lost their soul to that power. Don't speak to her, regime Superman snapped, positioning himself between them. You don't know her. You don't know any of us. You're a phantom from a world that doesn't exist. Preaching morals that got millions killed. His voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting, the calm of absolute conviction. I watched Metropolis burn. I killed the woman I loved with my own hands because a madman drugged me. 7 million people died because I hesitated, because I tried to be the merciful hero you're pretending to be. I know, the visitor said, and the empathy in his voice was genuine, painful. In my universe, we stopped the Joker 30 seconds earlier. Just 30 seconds. That's the only difference between us, not morality, not strength, not conviction, just timing, and the choice of what to do next. Then you got lucky, regime Superman said coldly. I got tested, and I learned that the world doesn't need a symbol. It needs a savior. He spread his arms, gesturing to the controlled city below. Look at Gotham. Before the regime, this was the crime capital of the world. The Joker murdered thousands. The Riddler held the city hostage monthly. Poison ivy's spores killed indiscriminately. Every night was a war zone. His voice took on the tone of religious certainty. Now, 0 murders last year. 0 rapes. 0 robberies. The people below us live in perfect safety because I made the hard choice you couldn't. They live in a prison, the visitor countered. A comfortable prison with walls they can't see, but a prison nonetheless. You didn't save them. You conquered them. The regime enforcers tensed, waiting for the order to attack. Wonder Woman's hand tightened on her sword. Her loyalty to regime Superman warring with something the visitor's words had. Awakened, doubt, memory. The echo of the hero she'd once been. In the ruins below, Batman watched through remote sensors, his tactical mind calculating odds and outcomes, while his heart dared to hope that this confrontation might be the catalyst the insurgency desperately needed. You're going to make me destroy you, regime Superman said with something approaching sorrow. I don't want to. Despite what you think, I take no pleasure in violence anymore. But I can't allow you to destabilize what I've built. Can't let you inspire the malcontents and terrorists who want to return to the chaos of the old world. He began removing his cape, folding it with precise care, a ritual before combat. So I'll give you one chance. Kneel. Accept that I was right and you're wrong. Help me build a better world where no one else has to lose what we lost. No. The visitor's refusal was simple, absolute. Because the moment I kneel to a tyrant, even a tyrant who started as a hero, Superman dies. The symbol dies, and hope dies with it. His heat vision began to glow, matching the regime Superman's power exactly. I won't fight you to destroy you, Clark. I'll fight you to remind you who you used to be, who you could still choose to be. Then you'll die proving nothing, regime Superman said, and launched himself forward with the acceleration of a meteor. The collision shook Gotham to its foundations. 2 Kryptonians moving at supersonic speeds, each possessing exactly the same powers, the same reflexes, the same capacity for destruction. They met above the ruins of what had once been Crime Alley, a location heavy with symbolism neither Superman Acknowledged, and the shockwave. Shattered windows. For 3 blocks in every direction. Regime Superman fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who'd ended 1,000 fights before they could truly begin. No wasted movement. No hesitation. Every strike designed to incapacitate, to prove his superiority, to demonstrate that his evolution beyond mercy was strength, not weakness. He'd fought Kryptonians before, Zod's invasion, Doomsday's rampage. He knew how to hurt his own kind. But the Visitor fought differently. Every block was precise, but not punishing. Every counterattack carefully calibrated to defend without permanently maiming. He was holding back not from weakness, but from principle, the same principle Regime Superman had abandoned 5 years ago when he drove his fist through the Joker's chest on live television. They traded blows that would have leveled mountains. Heat vision that carved molten trenches through concrete and steel. The Visitor caught a punch, meant to shatter his jaw and redirected it into the empty sky. Regime Superman grabbed for his throat and found himself thrown backward through structural supports that collapsed like cardboard. Neither was winning. Neither was losing. It was a stalemate of gods, each demonstrating what Superman meant to them. Wonder Woman watched from above. Her immortal warriors' eyes seeing things the Enforcers couldn't comprehend. The Visitor wasn't just fighting defensively. He was teaching. Every parried strike, every redirected attack, every moment of restrained power was a lesson in what Superman should be. The Tyrant was stronger, perhaps, hardened by years of ruling through force. But the Visitor was truer, untainted by the corruptions that came with absolute authority. Diana. Batman's voice crackled through her communicator, a frequency he'd kept active despite 5 years of enmity. You see it, don't you? You see the difference. Her hand trembled on her sword. Bruce, don't. You were raised by Amazons who valued truth above comfort, Batman continued, his voice carrying the weight of their former friendship. Look at them. Really look. One of them is fighting to dominate. The other is fighting to protect. One of them has become what you spent your life opposing. The other still believes in what we used to stand for. Below them, Regime Superman caught the Visitor with a devastating combination. Left hook, right cross, knee to the solar plexus. That would have killed any normal being. The Visitor absorbed the punishment and responded not with escalation, but with restraint, sweeping the Tyrant's legs and pinning him momentarily against a ruined building. I don't want to hurt you, the Visitor said, their faces inches apart. I want to help you remember. Before the regime, before the executions, before you decided the world needed a master instead of an inspiration. You were my hero once. You can be again. Your hero is dead, Regime Superman roared, breaking free with a burst of heat vision that forced the Visitor to dodge. He died with Lois, with Metropolis, with every innocent person who died, because heroes were too noble to make the hard choices. He pursued with relentless fury. I am what the world needed me to become. I am the evolution of Superman beyond childish idealism. No, the Visitor said sadly, catching both of the Tyrant's wrists in an unbreakable grip. You're what happens when Superman stops believing that people are worth saving. When he decides that control is love and domination is protection. He headbutt Regime Superman hard enough to leave both there invulnerable, heads ringing. You're the cautionary tale every hero dreads becoming. The words struck deeper than any physical blow. Regime Superman's expression twisted with rage, grief, and something he'd buried for 5 years, doubt. The Visitor saw the opening and pressed it, releasing the Tyrant and floating backward. Hands spread in a gesture of peace despite the violence. Come back, the Visitor said quietly. It's not too late. Even after everything, the executions, the regime, the world you've built on fear, it's not too late to choose differently. To prove that Superman isn't defined by his worst moment, but by whether he can rise above it. For one crystalline instant, possibility hung in the air. Regime Superman floated in the wreckage of Gotham, his hands unclenched, his heat vision dimmed, his expression that of a man staring at the road not taken. Wonder Woman held her breath. The Enforcers awaited orders that didn't come. Batman, watching from the shadows, dared to hope that 5 years of horror might end not with more violence, but with redemption. Then Regime Superman's communicator chimed. Cyborg's voice, professional and cold. Sir, insurgency activity detected. In 3 sectors. They're using your distraction with the anomaly to mobilize. Orders. The moment shattered. Regime. Superman's face hardened back into the mask of authority he'd worn for 5 years. The doubt vanished, replaced by the certainty of a tyrant who'd convinced himself that any alternative to his rule meant chaos, death, suffering. He'd gone too far to turn back, admitted too much to deny, killed too many to pretend it was all a mistake. Contain them, he ordered. Standard protocols. Non-lethal unless they resist. He turned back to the visitor, and his eyes carried something worse than hatred. They carried pity. You're not the first person to try saving me from myself. Batman's been trying for 5 years. The difference is, he understood. I'm not the one who needs saving. He gestured to the controlled city below. They do. And I'm the only one strong enough to do it. Then we're at war, the visitor said quietly. No, regime Superman corrected. You're a criminal in my world now, an insurgency weapon, and like all threats to global peace, you'll be contained or eliminated. He nodded to Wonder Woman and the enforcers. Diana, take a team. Find the insurgency's Gotham cells. Show them that sheltering this weapon has consequences. Wonder Woman hesitated for just a fraction of a second, an eternity for an Amazon's reflexes. Then she drew her sword and nodded. As you command. But the visitor saw what regime Superman couldn't. Diana's grip on her sword was wrong. Her stance held the first tremors of doubt. The seed Batman had planted was taking root. And even the Tyrant's most loyal enforcer was beginning to question what she'd become. The regime forces dispersed to execute their orders, leaving the 2 Supermen floating in the wreckage of their confrontation. Regime Superman studied his dimensional mirror one more time. And when he spoke, his voice carried weary finality. I hope you survive long enough to understand why you're wrong, he said. This world will break you, just like it broke me. And when it does, when you've lost everything that makes you smile in that naive way, when you've watched innocent people die, because you were too noble to stop it permanently, you'll become me, or you'll die. There's no third option. There's always a third option, the visitor replied. It's called hope, and I'm here to remind this world what that means. Regime Superman said nothing more. He turned and flew toward the horizon, leaving sonic booms and shattered illusions in his wake. The visitor remained, floating above Gotham's ruins, processing the full horror of what his mirror had become. In a universe 30 seconds different, that could have been him. That could still be him. If he let grief and power convince him that control was love. Batman emerged from the shadows, grappling to a vantage point where he could address the visitor without leaving himself vulnerable. Now you understand what we're fighting, he said. That's not a villain. That's a hero who made one wrong choice and convinced himself it was the only choice. The most dangerous enemy isn't someone who knows they're evil. It's someone who believes they're righteous. I need to meet the insurgency, the visitor said, descending to Batman's level. Everyone who's still fighting. Everyone who remembers what Superman should be. His jaw set with determination. Because you're right, defeating him physically won't be enough. I have to prove that the choice he made wasn't inevitable. That Superman can endure the worst the world offers and still choose mercy over mastery. The safe house is 3 miles north, Batman said, triggering a recall signal. But understand something before you meet them. These people have been fighting a god for 5 years. They've watched friends executed, families imprisoned, ideals crushed. They're tired, bitter, and some of them want to kill Clark rather than save him. His eyes met the visitor's through the cowl. You represent their last hope. Don't waste it on speeches about redemption. Show them you can actually win. The visitor nodded, understanding the weight of what Batman was asking. He'd crossed dimensions to fight a war that wasn't originally his. He'd discovered that his greatest enemy wore his face and believed himself a savior. And now he had to convince broken, desperate resistance fighters that hope wasn't just another word for suicide. But as he followed Batman through Gotham's controlled streets, past citizens who'd learned to smile on command and never question authority, the visitor felt something the regime Superman had lost 5 years ago. Certainty that he was fighting for something worth dying for. Freedom, choice, the messy, dangerous, beautiful right to fail or succeed on your own terms. The insurgency's last hope had arrived. Now he just had to prove he was worth believing in. The insurgencies. Gotham's safe house existed in the liminal space between the regime's perfect surveillance and complete oversight, a calculated blind spot. Batman had engineered into the system years ago when Cyborg first implemented the global monitoring network. The abandoned Wayne Enterprises R&D facility had been officially destroyed in the regime's early purges, its ruins marked as structurally unsound and chemically contaminated. In truth, the basement levels housed one of the insurgency's most critical command centers, shielded by technology that predated regime oversight and powered by generators the surveillance algorithms had been programmed to ignore. The visitor descended through layers of deception, false rubble concealing reinforced bunkers, radiation warnings hiding functional infrastructure, the careful architecture of resistance in a world where dissent meant disappearance. Batman led him through security protocols that would have impressed Argus in its prime, biometric scans, quantum encryption, pressure plates calibrated to detect regime enforcers' standard equipment. Every precaution spoke of 5 years fighting an enemy who could hear heartbeats from orbit and see through walls with casual effort. The command center hummed with desperate energy when they entered. Screens displayed regime troop movements, intercepted communications, civilian sympathy assessments. A dozen insurgency operatives worked with the intensity of people who knew every second counted. Every mission could be their last. And at the center of controlled chaos stood the surviving members of what had once been the Justice League. Green Arrow spotted them first, his bow already drawn before recognition registered. "Bruce, you brought." He stopped mid-sentence, the arrow point dropping as his mind processed the impossible. "Holy hell, is that not him?" Batman said curtly. From another universe, where Clark didn't fall. The room went silent. Every operative, every fighter, every surviving hero turned to stare at the visitor with expressions ranging from desperate hope to naked suspicion. Black Canary moved her hand to her comm device, ready to sound an alarm. Huntress's crossbow tracked the visitor's chest. Despite the futility of the gesture, Catwoman, perched in the shadows with feline grace, watched with the calculating assessment of someone who'd learned to trust no one. And then Harley Quinn laughed, the broken, manic sound of someone who'd found humor in the apocalypse. "Oh, this is rich." Bats brought home a souvenir Superman. "What's next?" "A nice dark side from the universe where he runs a charity." Harley, Black Canary warned. But the former villain turned insurgency fighter was already approaching the visitor with the fearless curiosity of someone who'd looked at sanity and decided it was overrated. "You really him?" she asked, circling the visitor like a predator assessing prey. The big blue Boy Scout before he went full Hitler? Before he decided splattering Mr. J across a prison floor was opening act. Her smile held edges that could cut. "Gotta say, the resemblance is creepy. Same face, same costume, same 'I'm here to save you' energy." She leaned close, sniffing theatrically. "But you don't smell like a tyrant. They've got this ode to absolute power cologne. You just smell like hope." "Weird." "Harley, back off," Green Arrow said, lowering his bow but keeping an arrow knocked. "Let Bruce explain before you traumatize our dimensional visitor with your special brand of therapy." Batman moved to the central display, pulling up files with practiced efficiency. 63 minutes ago, a dimensional breach opened over Gotham. Monitor energy signature, speed force residue. Quantum instability consistent with multiverse incursion. This Superman, Clark Kent from an alternate timeline, emerged. Same powers, same abilities, different choices. He met the room's collective skepticism with his usual directness. The Joker tried the same plan in his universe. They stopped it 30 seconds earlier. The weight of those 30 seconds settled over the room like a funeral shroud. Every person present knew the Metropolis story. The moment Superman's world ended and the regime began. 30 seconds. The difference between tragedy and triumph. Between the hero and the tyrant. 30 seconds, Black Canary repeated quietly. Her voice carried the scars of someone who'd watched the Justice League tear itself apart, who'd chosen the insurgency knowing it likely meant her death. That's all it took. 30 seconds and we're in this hell instead of. She couldn't finish the thought. "I've already engaged regime Superman," the visitor said, addressing the room with the calm authority of someone accustomed to leadership, but willing to earn it. He sees me as a weapon, a psychological trick Batman designed to destabilize him. He's ordered Diana to hunt you down, to prove that sheltering me has consequences. His expression hardened. I won't let that happen. You didn't ask for my help, but I'm offering it anyway. Because in every universe, in every timeline, Superman is supposed to stand for something worth dying for. And in this world, you're the one still fighting for it. Pretty speech, Huntress said, not lowering her crossbow. But speeches don't stop a Kryptonian who can lobotomize you with heat vision before you finish blinking. What makes you different from him? Besides the dimensional frequent flyer miles. I haven't forgotten what the symbol means, the visitor replied simply. Clark, you're Clark, convinced himself that saving people means controlling them. That love means removing their ability to make mistakes. That hope is naive and power demands use. He met each skeptical gaze in turn. I came from a universe where I could have made the same choice, where grief and rage and the desire to prevent all suffering could have turned me into him. But I had people who reminded me that Superman doesn't rule. He inspires. He protects. He believes in humanity, even when humanity gives him every reason not to. Green Arrow studied him for a long moment, the compound bow relaxing incrementally. You know what the worst part is? He still thinks he's the hero. When he executed the Joker, when he burned the flag of every nation that didn't submit to the regime, when he lobotomized Zash and made him his smiling servant, every single time, he believed he was saving lives, preventing suffering, being the hero we were too weak to be. That's what makes him so dangerous, Batman interjected. He's not a villain who knows he's evil. He's a true believer in his own righteousness. Every atrocity is justified by utilitarian math. Every freedom stripped away is a life saved. He's built an entire moral framework where absolute control equals absolute compassion. The visitor nodded slowly, understanding the trap. Then we have to prove him wrong, not just by defeating him, but by demonstrating that free people can choose good without being forced. That humanity deserves the chance to fail and grow rather than being frozen in perfect, sterile safety. He turned to Batman. What's the insurgency's current status? Resources, personnel, strategic objectives? Batman pulled up a holographic display of their global network. Red zones marked regime-controlled territories, which was most of the planet. Green zones showed insurgency strongholds, pitifully small and scattered. Yellow zones indicated contested areas where civilian sympathy remained split between freedom and security. We're losing, Batman said with characteristic bluntness. The regime controls 78% of the planet's population. They've ended violent crime, territorial conflicts, and resource wars. Most civilians see the regime as humanity's salvation, not its prison. His jaw tightened. The insurgency's support comes primarily from people who remember what freedom felt like. But that generation is aging. The children growing up under the regime know nothing else. They think surveillance is safety and dissent is terrorism. We've got maybe 1,500 active fighters globally, Green Arrow added. Compared to the regime's millions, they've got Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Cyborg, and about 100 metahuman enforcers who believe in the cause. We've got Batman's tactical genius, whatever heroes refuse to submit, and a whole lot of desperation. And now we've got you, Catwoman said from her perch, her voice carrying skeptical curiosity. Question is, does one more Superman actually change the math? Regime Clark has been invincible for 5 years. No kryptonite weakens him. He destroyed every sample, then destroyed the planet it came from. No magic users challenge him. He recruited or imprisoned them all. No other Kryptonians oppose him. Zod's in the Phantom Zone. Kara sided with him, and Connor. She trailed off. The loss too painful to articulate. Connor tried to stop him. Harley finished quietly, her manic energy dimming. Superman's own clone son said the regime was wrong. Said killing was wrong. Said Clark wasn't Superman anymore. Her eyes went distant. Clark heat visioned him into critical condition. Put him in a coma he hasn't woken from. 3 years and counting. Left him alive as a reminder. Even family doesn't get mercy if they threaten the peace. The visitor's expression shuddered with carefully controlled rage. He did that to Connor? To a kid who looked up to him? To everyone who opposes him, Black Canary said. The Joker's execution was televised. But after that, he got more efficient, more clinical. The regime doesn't just kill you, they erase you. Your name gets stricken from records. Your family learns to pretend you never existed. You become an unperson, and the world moves on in perfect peace. Her voice cracked slightly. Dinah Lance, Green Arrow, Black Canary, those names are terrorist designations now. Our families disowned us to avoid regime attention. We're ghosts fighting a god. The visitor absorbed this, his enhanced hearing picking up the exhaustion in their heartbeats, the trauma in their breathing patterns, the desperation underlying every word. These weren't heroes anymore. They were survivors, clinging to principles the world had voted to abandon in exchange for security. And they were expecting him to be their salvation. I can't promise victory, he said finally. I can't guarantee that having another Superman changes the fundamental math of this war. But I can promise that as long as I'm here, the regime has an enemy who matches their power. Clark won't be able to threaten execution without facing equal resistance. Diana won't enforce tyranny without someone reminding her what Amazon honor actually means. His heat vision flickered with controlled intensity. And most importantly, the people of this world will see that Superman isn't synonymous with the regime, that the symbol can mean hope again. Batman's tactical display shifted, showing real-time regime movements. Diana's already mobilizing. 3 regime teams converging on suspected insurgency locations in Gotham. She's using your appearance as justification for a major sweep. We've got maybe an hour before they breach our secondary safe houses. Then we don't have time for philosophical debates, the visitor said. What's the immediate priority? Evacuate the safe houses? Engage the regime teams? Send a message that the insurgency just got significantly more dangerous. Green Arrow and Batman exchanged glances, the wordless communication of partners who'd fought together for decades. Finally, Oliver spoke. We need to prove you're real, that you're not some elaborate regime trap. Half our people think you're a shapeshifter or a mind-controlled clone. They won't follow you into battle without proof. What kind of proof? The visitor asked. Fight Wonder Woman, Harley suggested with disturbing enthusiasm. Nothing says, I'm the real deal, like going 12 rounds with the regime's enforcer-in-chief. Plus, it'd be fun to watch. She's been insufferable since she and Clark started their tyrannical power couple routine. Diana's the key, Batman agreed, though his reasoning was more tactical than entertainment-focused. She's regime Superman's most powerful ally and his emotional anchor. If we can turn her, or at least make her doubt, the entire regime's moral foundation cracks. She's the warrior princess who decided tyranny was justice. If another Superman can prove that wrong, he let the implication hang. The visitor considered this, remembering the Diana he knew, fierce, compassionate, unwavering in her commitment to truth and honor. How had this world's Wonder Woman convinced herself that enforcing a dictator's will was the warrior's path? What had Superman said or done to transform an Amazon into an enforcer of absolute control? Where is she now, he asked. Catwoman tapped her datapad, pulling up surveillance intercepts, leading a team toward the Tricorner district. That's where we've got families, insurgency members, relatives who we're protecting from regime retaliation. She knows we'll defend them. She's counting on it. Wants to bait us into engagement so she can justify escalation. Then that's where I'm going, the visitor decided. Not to fight her, if it can be avoided, but to remind her who she used to be. What Amazon honor actually demands. He turned to Batman. Evacuate the families. I'll buy you time and try to reach Diana before Clark's corruption is permanent. You're going to try reasoning with someone who spent 5 years justifying executions and thought crime. Huntress asked incredulously. Good luck with that. She's as far gone as he is. Maybe, the visitor acknowledged. But I saw something when we fought. A hesitation. A moment where she looked at me and remembered what Superman could be instead of what he became. His cape swirled as he moved toward the exit. Everyone has a moment where they choose who they want to be. Diana had hers 5 years ago when she chose Clark over justice. But that doesn't mean she can't choose differently now. Batman moved to intercept him, lowering his voice so only Superman's enhanced hearing would catch the words. If Diana can't be turned, you'll have to fight her. Are you prepared to do what's necessary? I won't kill her, the visitor said firmly. I won't become what I'm fighting against. Then you might lose, Batman said bluntly. Diana fights to win. Always. If you hold back, she'll exploit it. If you show mercy, she'll see weakness. The warrior's code she follows now is survival of the strongest, rule of the powerful. She abandoned the Amazon way the moment she decided love was more important than truth. Then I'll have to show her that love without truth is just obsession, the visitor replied. That the Diana Prince I know, the one this world had, would never have stood beside a tyrant, no matter how much she loved him. He met Batman's gaze through the cowl. You asked what makes me different from regime Superman. This is it. I believe people can change. I believe redemption is possible, even for gods who've forgotten what they're supposed to stand for. He launched himself through the safe house's concealed exit, leaving a wake of displaced air and desperate hope. The insurgency members watched him go in silence, their expressions reflecting the complex emotions of people who'd seen too much. Betrayal to trust easily but remained desperate enough to hope anyway. Think he can actually do it? Green Arrow asked quietly. Turn Diana? Defeat regime Superman without becoming him? Batman's answer was characteristically enigmatic. I think he's going to try. And trying might be enough to remind this world what heroes used to look like. He pulled up the tactical display again, already planning evacuation routes and contingencies. But if he fails, if Diana kills him or Clark corrupts him, we're worse off than we started. Because then we'll have proof that no Superman, from any universe, can resist the temptation of absolute power. Cheerful as always, Bats, Catwoman murmured. But her eyes tracked the visitor's trajectory on the screen. And despite herself, despite 5 years of disappointment and betrayal, she felt something she'd thought the regime had executed alongside the Joker. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, possibly suicidal hope that maybe, just maybe, Superman could still mean something worth fighting for. In the Tricorner district, Wonder Woman's sword gleamed in the afternoon sun as she prepared to demonstrate what happened to those who sheltered enemies of peace. Behind her, regime enforcers took positions with military precision. And somewhere in the sky between them, a Superman who still believed in redemption flew toward his first true test. The war for Earth's soul had begun, and neither side could afford to lose. The Tricorner district existed as a monument to the regime's contradiction, a neighborhood preserved as proof that Superman's rule allowed dissent, while simultaneously serving as a containment zone for families too connected to the insurgency to be trusted, but too visible to simply disappear. The buildings showed their age with dignified decay, their residents moving with the careful deliberation of people who understood. They lived under a microscope. Regime surveillance drones hummed overhead like mechanical wasps, their presence both protection and threat. Here, the illusion of freedom masked the reality of a gilded cage. Wonder Woman descended into the district's central square with the controlled grace of a warrior goddess, claiming conquered territory. Her armor caught the afternoon light, battle-scarred where the ceremonial gold had been replaced with apocalyptian alloys, practical modifications that spoke of 5 years enforcing peace at sword point. Behind her, 6 regime enforcers fanned into tactical formation, former heroes whose names had been subsumed by their new identity as extensions of Superman's will. They moved with the precision of soldiers who'd learned that hesitation meant demotion, and demotion under the regime often meant becoming what you'd once fought against. The district's residents scattered like birds before a storm, disappearing into buildings with practiced efficiency. They'd learned the pattern. Regime presence meant interrogation, meant someone would be taken for questioning, meant families would wake tomorrow with gaps at the breakfast table and no one would ask why. The Tricorner's fragile autonomy existed at Superman's pleasure, and Wonder Woman's arrival meant that pleasure was being reconsidered. Attention residents of Tricorner District. Diana's voice rang across the square with battlefield authority. By decree of the regime, this sector is subject to immediate security sweep. An enemy combatant has been detected operating with insurgency support. All residents are to remain in their homes while regime forces conduct necessary investigations. She paused, letting the words settle like a sentence. Cooperation will be rewarded. Resistance will be noted. From his position 300 feet above the district, the visitor observed with X-ray vision and enhanced hearing. mapping the tactical situation, with Clark Kent's journalistic eye and Superman's strategic assessment. 23 families still in the district, down from the hundreds who'd lived here before the regime's protection began. 15 children, their heartbeats racing with fear they'd been taught to suppress. And Diana, standing in the center of it all, believing she was protecting these people by threatening them. He descended slowly, deliberately, giving her time to notice his approach. No surprise attacks, no tactical advantage through deception. If he was going to reach the Diana he believed still existed beneath the regime's corruption, he had to fight like Superman, not like a strategist making expedient choices. Wonder Woman's hand moved to her sword before conscious recognition registered. Her enhanced senses, gifts from Olympus that rivaled Kryptonian abilities, identified the threat and analyzed it in milliseconds. Another Superman, the dimensional anomaly, the impossible mirror of the man she loved, showing her what he might have been if Metropolis had never burned. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice carrying across the distance with perfect clarity. "This is regime business. Insurgency harboring, not your concern. Everything that happens in Clark's name is my concern," the visitor replied, landing in the square with careful control, his boots touching ancient cobblestones without cracking them. "Because every action he takes, every order he gives, every freedom he strips away, they're all done wearing the symbol I wear. And I won't let that symbol mean tyranny." The regime enforcers shifted nervously, hands moving to weapons that would be useless against a Kryptonian, but provided psychological comfort. Diana held up a hand, stopping them from attacking. This wasn't a fight her subordinates could win. This was between gods, between philosophies, between the warrior princess, who'd chosen love over truth, and the symbol who still believed truth mattered more. "You speak as if you understand this world," Diana said, circling him with a predator's assessment. "You've been here, what, 2 hours? And you think you comprehend 5 years of rebuilding civilization from the ashes of chaos." Her sword remained sheathed, but her stance was pure combat readiness. Before the regime, this district averaged 15 murders per week. Rape, robbery, gang violence. Children grew up learning that law was a suggestion, and justice was a fantasy. Her voice hardened. Now, 0 violent crimes in 3 years. These people are alive and safe because Clark made the hard choice to ensure their protection. By making them prisoners, the visitor countered. By taking away their right to choose risk over security. By deciding that safety matters more than freedom. He gestured to the buildings where residents hid, listening through walls with hearts pounding. "Look at them, Diana. Really look. They're not grateful. They're terrified. Terrified that one wrong word, one suspicious action, one failure to demonstrate sufficient loyalty will make them disappear into regime custody where they receive rehabilitation," Diana interrupted. "Where dangerous ideologies are corrected, where people who would harm themselves and others learn to contribute to the greater good." She took a step closer, and her eyes, those fierce, immortal eyes, held absolute conviction. "You call it imprisonment. I call it healing. We take broken people and show them a better way. You take people who disagree and erase their ability to disagree." The visitor said quietly, "That's not healing, Diana. That's thought control. It's what tyrants do when they're too afraid to let people choose wrong." He met her gaze directly, seeing past the regime enforcer to the hero he knew she'd been. "The Diana Prince I know would never have stood for this. She'd have opposed Superman the moment he executed the Joker. She'd have reminded him that warriors don't rule, they protect. That strength without mercy is just tyranny with good publicity." Something flickered across Diana's expression. Pain. Memory. The ghost of the hero she'd been. "The Diana you think you know came from a world that never tested her," she said, and her voice carried the weight of 5 years' justification. "Easy to have principles when you've never watched millions die, because you weren't strong enough to stop it. Easy to preach mercy when you've never held the woman you love as she bled out from a wound you inflicted." Her hand tightened on her sword hilt. "Clark didn't choose to become what he is. The world chose it for him, and I chose to stand beside him, because I understood that love means supporting your partner, even when the choice is impossible. Love means telling your partner when they're wrong," the visitor replied. "Even when it's hard." especially when it's hard. He took a step closer, and Diana's combat instincts flared, but he kept his hands visible, non-threatening. In my universe, when the Joker almost broke me, when I almost became what Clark became, you know who stopped me? Bruce. My best friend looked me in the eye and said, "If you cross this line, I'll stop you. Whatever it takes." That's love, Diana. That's partnership. Holding each other accountable when power tempts us to take the easy path. Bruce is a terrorist now, Diana said coldly, leading an insurgency that would return this world to chaos and suffering. If that's your idea of love, I want no part of it. Bruce is the last hero standing, the visitor countered. The last person willing to say that Superman is wrong. That control isn't compassion. That the regime is exactly what we spend our entire careers fighting against. His voice dropped, carrying across the empty square like a prayer. Diana, I know you remember. Before the regime, before the executions, you stood for truth, for honor, for the warriors. Code that says we fight for those who can't. Fight for themselves, not rule over them for our definition of their own good. That code was written for a different world, Diana said, but her voice held the first fractures of doubt. A world where villains could be imprisoned and heroes could show mercy. This world taught us differently. This world showed us that mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. She drew her sword, not an attack, but a declaration. I have stood beside Clark through 5 years of hard choices. I have helped him build a world where children don't wake up afraid, where mothers don't bury sons to gang violence, where humanity finally has protection from its own worst impulses. And I won't let you, an outsider, a stranger, a phantom from a world that doesn't understand what we've endured, tear that down with pretty words about freedom. The regime enforcers tensed, reading Diana's body language and preparing for combat. Residents peered through curtains, witnessing the confrontation. That would determine whether the Tricorner district survived the day. And somewhere, the visitor knew, Batman was evacuating families. And Green Arrow was positioning arrows that couldn't hurt Diana but might provide tactical advantage. The entire insurgency was watching, wondering if their last hope could do the impossible, turn Wonder Woman back to the light. I'm not trying to tear anything down, the visitor said carefully. I'm trying to remind you what you're building on. The regime's foundation is fear, Diana. Compliance through intimidation. Every drone overhead, every surveillance protocol, every rehabilitation center, they all scream the same message: obey or disappear. He spread his hands, showing no weapon, no threat, just earnest appeal. You're one of the greatest warriors who ever lived. A champion of truth trained by Amazons who valued honor above comfort. And you're using all that power, all that skill, to enforce a tyrant's peace. He's not a tyrant, Diana snapped. But the words came too quickly, too defensive. He's a savior who made the choices no one else would make, who bore the burden of absolute power so humanity wouldn't have to. He's a dictator who convinced himself control equals love, the visitor replied. And you're standing beside him because you can't admit that the man you love became the monster you used to fight. He took another step closer, and Diana's sword rose incrementally. In my universe, Hippolyta taught you that warriors serve truth, not power. That Amazon honor demands we question authority, especially when that authority claims to act in our best interest. What would your mother say if she saw you now? Enforcing thought crime? Threatening families? Standing beside a man who lobotomized his own clone son for disagreeing with him? The mention of Connor struck like a blade. Diana's expression cracked, revealing the pain she'd buried beneath 5 years of rationalization. Connor was manipulated by the insurgency, she said, but the conviction was gone. Clark showed him mercy by putting a kid in a coma for 3 years, the visitor interrupted. By heat visioning someone who looked up to him, who called him dad, who just wanted the hero back. His voice carried equal parts anger and grief. That's not mercy, Diana. That's a warning. That's what happens when absolute power meets the slightest opposition. And you stood by and watched it happen. Diana's sword trembled, just for an instant. The visitor saw it, the fracture in her certainty, the doubt Batman had planted growing into something she couldn't ignore. She'd convinced herself for 5 years that supporting Clark was love, that helping him enforce his perfect peace was the warrior's duty. But facing another Superman, one who'd endured the same loss and chosen differently, forced her to confront the possibility she'd been lying to herself. "You don't know what it was like," she said, and for the first time, her voice carried vulnerability instead of authority. "After Metropolis, after Lois, he was broken, and I was the only one who could reach him. Bruce was investigating him like a criminal. The League was fracturing. The world was watching to see if Superman would survive or shatter." Her eyes met his, pleading for understanding. "I chose to stand with him because I believed he needed support, not judgment. I believed love meant staying even when the path got dark." "And where did that path lead?" the visitor asked gently. "To executions, to thought, control, to a world where children are taught that freedom is dangerous and submission is safety." He extended his hand, not in threat, but in invitation. "Diana, it's not too late. You can still choose truth over loyalty. You can still be the hero Themyscira raised, the warrior who fought beside Superman, not for him, but beside him, as an equal who held him accountable." For one crystalline moment, Wonder Woman stood at a crossroads she'd been avoiding for 5 years. The visitor saw it in her posture, in the way her sword lowered fractionally, in the war between the hero she'd been and the enforcer she'd become. She'd loved Clark Kent, the man who smiled at Lois and believed humanity was worth saving. But that man had died in Metropolis, and she'd convinced herself the tyrant who remained was the same person, just evolved beyond naive idealism. Now, facing proof that evolution wasn't inevitable, she had to choose: continue the lie, or admit she'd spent 5 years enabling a monster. Then her communicator chimed. Clark's voice, tight with controlled fury. "Diana, status report. I'm detecting elevated stress in your biometrics. Has the anomaly engaged you?" Diana's eyes closed. For just a moment, a warrior, gathering herself before committing to battle. When they opened, the doubt was locked away, replaced by the iron certainty of someone who'd gone too far to turn back. "Engaging now," she reported. "The enemy is attempting psychological manipulation, trying to fracture regime solidarity. Request backup if situation escalates." "Backup is already en route," Clark replied. "Disable him if possible. Eliminate if necessary. We can't allow him to destabilize what we've built." The visitor heard every word with Kryptonian hearing and felt his hope crack. Diana had made her choice. Again, she'd chosen loyalty over truth, love over honor, the comfortable lie over the painful possibility that she'd been wrong for 5 years. He'd failed to reach her, but he had to try once more. "Diana, please," he said as she raised her sword into attack position. "Before we fight, before you prove your loyalty to Clark by trying to kill me, answer one question. If the positions were reversed, if I was the tyrant and Clark was the one trying to save me, would you want him to give up? Or would you want him to keep fighting? Keep believing that Wonder Woman could still be reached?" She hesitated. The sword point wavered. The regime enforcers watched their commander, confused by her indecision. And in that moment of vulnerability, the visitor saw the truth. Diana knew. Deep down, beneath all the justifications and rationalizations, she knew the regime was wrong. She knew Clark had become what they'd sworn to fight. She knew love had blinded her to tyranny. She just couldn't admit it. Not yet. Not while the world she'd helped build would collapse if she did. "I'm sorry," Diana said quietly, and lunged forward with the speed of an Amazon warrior goddess. The visitor caught her blade between his palms. Kryptonian invulnerability against enchanted Amazon steel, the clash ringing across the district like a church bell. He held her there, not fighting back, just defending, his eyes pleading with her to remember what she'd been. "I forgive you," he said, and released her blade. Diana stumbled backward, thrown off balance by his refusal to fight. The visitor rose into the air, hands spread in peace despite her aggression. "I won't hurt you, Diana, even if you're determined to hurt me, because that's not what Superman does. That's not what the symbol means. And someday, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, you're going to remember that. You're going to remember that warriors protect, they don't conquer. And when you do, the insurgency will welcome you back." He turned and flew, not in retreat, but in strategic withdrawal. Behind him, Diana stood frozen, sword raised, her mind replaying his words and her heart screaming that he was right. But the regime enforcers were watching. Clark was listening, and admitting doubt was the first step toward admitting complicity. in 5 years of atrocities. So she sheathed her sword and reported. Target evaded engagement. Psychological warfare ineffective. He's attempting to sow discord in regime ranks by appealing to outdated moral frameworks. Recommend increased security protocols for all regime personnel. Agreed, Clark replied. Return to base. We'll handle the anomaly together. He wants to prove I was wrong to evolve beyond mercy. We'll show him why mercy was weakness and strength was the only answer. Diana launched skyward, following protocol and orders and the path of least resistance. But as she flew, she couldn't stop hearing his question. If the positions were reversed, would you want Clark to give up? The answer terrified her, because she knew if she were the tyrant and Clark the hero, she'd want him to fight for her, to believe in her, to remind her what Amazon honor truly demanded, which meant the visitor was right, which meant she'd been wrong for 5 years, which meant everything she'd built, every choice she'd made, every execution she'd justified, was built on a foundation of fear and denial, rather than strength and conviction. The weight of that realization would have crushed a mortal. Diana carried it with warrior's discipline, locking it away until she could afford to face it. But the seed was planted. Batman's whisper had become the visitor's question, and Diana Prince, who'd been raised to value truth above all else, couldn't ignore it forever. In the Tricorner district, residents emerged cautiously from hiding. They'd witnessed something unprecedented. Superman refusing to fight Wonder Woman, the regime's second most powerful enforcer, unable to strike down an enemy who wouldn't raise a hand against her. It was a small moment in a long war. But small moments change worlds. And hope, once planted, is remarkably difficult to kill. The Fortress of Solitude stood in Arctic isolation like a cathedral of crystalline judgment, its Kryptonian architecture reaching toward frozen skies with the geometric precision of a civilization that had mastered science but failed to save itself. Superman had built it as sanctuary, a place to remember Krypton and find solace. When the weight of Earth's expectations became unbearable, now it served as the regime's strategic command center, part palace, part prison, part monument to the conviction that one man's will could reshape a planet. The visitor approached openly, making no attempt at stealth or subterfuge. His enhanced vision had already mapped the fortress's defenses, automated systems that could detect a mosquito's heartbeat from orbit, crystalline weapons arrays capable of generating synthetic kryptonite radiation, and deeper in the structure's heart, the Phantom Zone projector that regime's Superman had used to eliminate threats too powerful to kill but too dangerous to imprison conventionally. The entire facility screamed a single message: absolute power, absolutely secured. Regime Superman waited in the main chamber, standing before a holographic display of Earth that showed every continent, every city, every region color-coded by stability metrics. Green dominated the map, peaceful, compliant, grateful for the protection only a god could provide. Scattered yellow zones marked areas requiring additional oversight, and tiny red pinpricks indicated insurgency activity, infections in the body politic that needed excision. I knew you'd come, Regime Superman said without turning. Heroes like you, like I used to be, can't resist the direct confrontation, the honest discussion, the belief that words can solve what force cannot. He gestured to the holographic Earth with something between pride and sorrow. 5 years ago, I would have invited you in as a guest, offered you Kryptonian hospitality, asked about your universe with genuine curiosity. Finally, he turned, and his expression carried the weight of a god who'd lost his humanity. Now I know that curiosity is a luxury Earth couldn't afford. You invited me anyway, the visitor observed, descending through the fortress's main entrance with cautious respect for the architecture, knowing I'm your enemy, knowing I represent everything you've convinced yourself you had to abandon. Why? Because I want you to understand, Regime Superman replied simply. Diana says you tried converting her with emotional appeals and moral philosophy, that you called me a tyrant and her my enabler, that you believe I became a monster when Metropolis fell. He moved closer, and the visitor noted how his counterpart's posture had changed. No longer the hopeful stance of a hero greeting the dawn, but the rigid bearing of a general surveying conquered territory. You're wrong. I didn't become a monster. I became necessary. The visitor stood his ground as regime. Superman circled him like a predator establishing dominance. Necessary, he repeated. That's what every dictator tells himself. That the executions, the surveillance, the thought control, it's all necessary, required. The only possible response to an imperfect world. He met his counterpart's eyes directly. Darkseid thinks he's necessary too. The difference is, he's honest about what he is. Don't compare me to Darkseid, Regime Superman said, heat vision flickering dangerously. I'm not trying to eliminate free will across the universe. I'm trying to protect people from the consequences of their worst impulses. He pulled up holographic displays, crime statistics, mortality rates, quality of life indices. Look at the data. Really look. Before the regime, Earth had 15 major armed conflicts ongoing, 43 million people in famine. Violent crime killed someone every 6 seconds. Children were sold into slavery. Women were trafficked across borders. And heroes, us, the Justice League, we stopped. Individual villains, while the systemic horrors ground on unchallenged. The visitor studied the displays, seeing the truth in the numbers even as he recognized the lie they told. And now, zero active military conflicts, Regime Superman stated. Zero famine. I personally ensure food distribution to every region. Violent crime reduced by 99.7%. Slavery eliminated. Trafficking ended. His voice carried the conviction of a true believer. I saved more lives in the first year of the regime than the entire Justice League saved in 20 years of reactive heroism. That's not tyranny. That's what happens when someone finally has the courage to use power for its intended purpose, protecting the innocent, not coddling the guilty. By taking away everyone's freedom to choose, the visitor countered. By deciding that safety matters more than liberty. That survival is more important than dignity. That people are children who need a strong father to prevent them from hurting themselves. He gestured to the holographic Earth with its overwhelming green compliance. You didn't save them, Clark. You conquered them and called it compassion. Regime Superman's jaw tightened. In your universe, how many people died while you debated the ethics of intervention? How many children were murdered because you respected territorial sovereignty? How many wars continued because you believed nations had the right to self-determination, even when they chose genocide? He brought up new data, projections, extrapolations, the mathematics of suffering. Your moral high ground is built on a foundation of corpses. People who died because Superman was too noble to force peace, too principled to eliminate threats permanently, too concerned with his image to make the hard choices. You're right, the visitor said quietly, and the admission clearly surprised Regime Superman. In my universe, people die because I can't save everyone. Wars happen because I respect sovereignty. Villains escape and kill again because I won't execute them. He stepped closer, closing the distance until they stood face to face, mirror, images separated by 30 seconds, and 5 years of choices. But those deaths aren't on my conscience. Those wars aren't my responsibility. Those crimes aren't my fault. Because I'm not God, Clark. Neither are you. We're just refugees from a dead planet who happened to land somewhere that worships us for abilities we did nothing to earn. Then what's the point? Regime Superman demanded. If we have godlike power and refuse to use it to its full potential, what's the purpose of the symbol? Why wear the S if not to actually save people? All people, permanently, from the suffering that humans inflict on themselves and each other. The visitor placed his hand on the holographic Earth, watching the green zones pulse with their stable compliance. Because the symbol isn't about saving people from themselves. It's about inspiring them to save themselves. About showing humanity that, despite all their flaws and failures and capacity for cruelty, they're still worth believing in. He met his counterpart's gaze directly. You stopped believing in them. That's the difference between us. When the Joker broke you, when Metropolis burned, you didn't lose Lois. You lost faith that humans could be better than their worst moment. They proved they couldn't, Regime Superman said coldly. The Joker was human. The criminals who celebrated his atrocities were human. The governments that permitted him to operate through legal technicalities were human. Lois died because humanity's systems failed to stop a madman, failed to protect the innocent, failed to do what was necessary when mercy meant more victims. His voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting. I learned that lesson in the worst way possible. You were lucky enough not to. Don't confuse luck with moral superiority. It wasn't luck, the visitor insisted. It was friends who held me accountable. Bruce, Diana, the League, they didn't let me become this. They reminded me that Superman's power comes with responsibility. Yes, but not the responsibility to rule. The responsibility to trust. To believe that even after the worst tragedy, people deserve the chance to choose their own path. Regime Superman laughed, but the sound carried no humor. Trust. That's your answer? Trust the species that created the Joker, that elected demagogues, that stood by while atrocities happened because intervention was impolite? He turned back to the holographic Earth, and his expression held something between love and contempt. I trusted them for years. Trusted that human systems would improve, that democracy and law and gradual progress would eventually create a better world. And what did that trust buy me? 7 million corpses and the woman I loved dead by my own hand. So you decided no one could be trusted. The visitor said that the only safe world is one where Clark Kent makes every decision, enforces every law, determines every outcome. You became the very thing we swore to fight, someone who believes. Their power gives them the right to override everyone else's choices. Not right, regime Superman corrected. Responsibility. When you can prevent suffering and choose not to, you're complicit in that suffering. When you can stop wars and respect sovereignty instead, you've decided your principles matter more than lives. He brought up images: Syria, Yemen, Myanmar, Rwanda, conflicts where Superman had respected human autonomy and humans had slaughtered each other. Look at them. Really look. Every corpse in those images died because heroes like you valued abstract concepts like freedom and sovereignty over actual human lives. You're not morally superior. You're just comfortable letting others pay the price for your principles. The visitor studied the images, feeling the weight of every life lost while he debated intervention. You're right that people died, that wars continued, that I made choices that cost lives. He met his counterparts, accusing gaze steadily. But I also preserved something you've destroyed: the possibility that humans could solve their own problems, that they could grow, evolve, become better, without a god forcing them into submission. His voice hardened with conviction. Your peace is sterile, Clark, perfect and permanent and completely hollow. You've eliminated human suffering by eliminating human agency. You've created a world where no one hurts because no one chooses anything anymore. They choose every day, regime Superman argued. They choose to live peacefully, to follow laws, to contribute to a society that actually functions. The only people I've restricted are those who would harm others, the criminals, the terrorists, the demagogues who profit from chaos. Everyone else has more freedom now than they ever did. Freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from the violence that your idealistic approach considered an acceptable cost of liberty. Freedom from choice, the visitor said. Freedom from dissent. Freedom from the right to be wrong, to fail, to learn from mistakes. You've created a gilded cage and called it paradise. He moved to stand beside his counterpart, both of them staring at the holographic Earth. I understand the temptation, Clark. Every day I wake up and hear the suffering I can't prevent. Every war I don't stop. Every crime I arrive too late to prevent. The weight of being able to do more, but choosing restraint, it's crushing. I know why you made this choice. Then why didn't you? Regime Superman asked, and for the first time, genuine curiosity replaced accusation. Because Batman made me promise, the visitor said quietly. After we stopped the Joker. After I almost crossed the line you crossed. Bruce sat me down in the Batcave and made me swear an oath. He said, the day you decide humanity needs saving from itself is the day I stop you. Whatever it takes. Because that's not Superman talking. That's a god who's forgotten what it's like to be human. He turned to face his counterpart directly. He was right. The moment we decide we know better than the people we're protecting, we're not heroes anymore. We're tyrants with good intentions. And history is full of those. Regime Superman's expression hardened. Batman is a terrorist now, leading an insurgency that would tear down everything I've built and return the world to chaos and suffering. If that's your moral compass, you're already lost. Batman is the only one with the courage to tell you you're wrong, the visitor countered. Everyone else either submitted or disappeared. Diana convinced herself your tyranny was love. Flash runs your errands. Cyborg maintains your surveillance state. But Bruce, human, vulnerable, outmatched, he still fights. Still believes Superman can be better. Still holds the line against the god you've become. He's delusional, Regime Superman said flatly, clinging to outdated ideals while the world moves forward without him. I offered him a place in the regime. Offered to let him maintain law and order in Gotham with my support. He chose terrorism instead. The holographic. Earth pulsed with its stable compliance. That's the difference between adaptation and extinction. I evolved. Bruce refuses to. And you're making the same mistake. The visitor shook his head slowly. No, Clark. You didn't evolve. You broke. And instead of healing, you decided breaking was strength. That grief was permission to rebuild the world in your image. That love meant preventing everyone else from ever experiencing loss, even if it meant stripping away everything that makes life worth living. He placed his hand over where Metropolis should be on the holographic display. Lois wouldn't have wanted this. She wouldn't have wanted you to become a dictator in her name. The mention of Lois struck like a kryptonite blade. Regime Superman's heat vision flared, his fists clenched, and for a moment the visitor thought his counterpart might attack. But instead, something worse happened. Regime Superman's expression crumbled, revealing the raw wound that 5 years of tyranny had been built to cover. Don't you dare speak her name, he said, voice shaking with barely controlled fury and grief. You didn't know her, didn't love her, didn't watch her die by your own hand. You have no right to tell me what she'd want. You're right, the visitor said gently. I don't know your Lois, but I know mine. And if I ever did what you've done, if I ever killed the Joker in cold blood, ruled Earth through fear, executed dissenters, turned Diana into an enforcer, and Bruce into a terrorist, she'd look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't her Clark anymore, that I'd become something she couldn't recognize, something she couldn't love. Regime Superman's facade shattered completely. Get out, he whispered. Get out of my fortress, out of my world. Go back to your naive universe where heroes can afford principles because they were lucky enough not to be tested. His heat vision charged, painting the crystalline walls red. Get out before I forget you're me and eliminate you like any other threat to global peace. I'm not leaving, the visitor said calmly. Not until you admit what you've become. Not until you face the truth. You've been running from for 5 years. He stepped closer, despite the danger, despite the heat vision that could lobotomize him if Regime Superman chose. You're not a hero who made hard choices. You're a victim who became a victimizer. You're the Joker's final triumph. Proof that one bad day can break anyone, even Superman. And every execution, every thought crime prosecution, every rehabilitation is just you trying to punish the world for hurting you. I'm protecting them. Regime Superman roared, and the fortress trembled with his rage. I'm ensuring no one else has to lose what I lost. That no other child has to grow up afraid. No other parent has to bury their family. No other hero has to live with the knowledge they could have prevented tragedy but chose principles instead. You're trying to control the uncontrollable, the visitor said, to guarantee safety in a universe that promises nothing but change. And in the process, you've destroyed everything that made you Superman. He spread his hands, showing no threat, no judgment, just sad understanding. Clark, I'm not your enemy. I'm your mirror, the reflection of who you could have been if you'd chosen healing over revenge. If you'd let grief make you kinder instead of harder. If you'd remembered that the S means hope, not domination. Regime Superman stood frozen, heat vision dying, fists unclenching, the weight of 5 years, choices pressing down on shoulders that had carried planets. The visitor saw the war in his counterpart's expression, the tyrant who'd convinced himself. Control was compassion, fighting against the hero who knew better but couldn't admit it without accepting full responsibility for half a decade of atrocities. I can't go back, Regime Superman finally whispered. Even if you're right, and you're not. But even if, I can't undo what I've done. Can't resurrect the people I executed. Can't return freedom to those I've controlled. Can't admit to 7 billion people that their savior was actually their jailer. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. I've gone too far. There's no redemption for someone who's done what I've done. There's always redemption, the visitor said. It's never too late to choose differently, to step down, to let humanity try governing itself again, to face justice for your actions, and prove that even gods can be held accountable. He extended his hand, not in alliance, but in possibility. I'll stand beside you, Clark. Face the consequences with you. Help rebuild what we've destroyed. But only if you admit the truth. The regime isn't salvation. It's your trauma externalized, your grief weaponized, your fear that you're not enough transformed into the need to control everything. Regime Superman stared at the offered hand for a long moment. The visitor could see the temptation in his eyes, the desperate desire to believe redemption was possible, that the past 5 years could be undone, that Superman could rise from the ashes of the tyrant he'd become. Then his communicator chimed. Multiple alerts. The insurgency was mobilizing across 3 continents, using the distraction of 2 supermen to strike at regime infrastructure. Batman's voice cut through the static. All units, this is our chance. The regime's divided. Hit them now while they're vulnerable. Regime Superman's expression hardened. The moment passed. The possibility died. You want to know the real difference between us? He said coldly. I make the hard choices. I bear the weight of absolute power so others don't have to. And I don't let naive philosophy prevent me from doing what's necessary. He turned away from the offered hand. Get out of my fortress. Join Batman's terrorists if you want. But understand that every life lost in this conflict, every instability your presence creates, every crack in the peace I've built, that's on you. You're choosing chaos over order, ideology over lives. And when people die because you refuse to help me protect them, their blood is on your hands. The visitor lowered his hand slowly. No, Clark. Their blood is on yours. Because you're the one who made protection indistinguishable from imprisonment. Who turned Superman into a synonym for tyrant. Who proved the Joker right about what one bad day can do. He rose into the air, preparing to leave. But I'll keep fighting. Keep believing you can change. Keep holding the line that you abandoned. Because that's what Superman does. We don't give up on people, even when they've given up on themselves. He flew from the fortress, leaving regime Superman alone, with his crystalline monuments and holographic empires and the terrible silence of a god who'd won the world and lost his soul. Behind him, alarms screamed in tactical. Displays lit up with insurgency attacks, and the regime mobilized to crush another outbreak of freedom. The war had escalated, and neither Superman was willing to surrender the symbol to the other. The regime's central monitoring station occupied what had once been the Hall of Justice, a building designed to inspire hope in visitors and remind heroes of their responsibility to the world. Now it functioned as the nervous system of global surveillance. Its marble halls replaced with screens showing every street corner, every public space, every face in every crowd. Cyborg stood at the command center's heart, his human eye tracking data streams while his technological components processed terabytes of information per second. He'd become what the regime needed, the perfect synthesis of man and machine, capable of seeing everything and questioning nothing. The screens flickered with reports of insurgency activity. Gotham's secondary safe houses evacuating. Green Arrow cell striking a regime supply depot in Star City. Black Canary leading a raid on a rehabilitation center in Central City. Coordinated attacks designed to stretch regime resources while the 2 Supermen remained deadlocked in philosophical warfare. Batman's tactical genius on full display, exploiting the one advantage the insurgency possessed: chaos against order, unpredictability against control. Status, regime Superman demanded, materializing in the command center with Diana beside him. The visitor's words still echoed in his mind. Unwanted doubts he crushed with practiced efficiency. Redemption was a luxury Earth couldn't afford. Regret was weakness. The regime would stand because it had to. 14 simultaneous insurgency operations across 6 continents, Cyborg reported, his mechanical voice carrying none of the warmth Victor Stone had once possessed. Estimated combatants, 300. Primary targets, supply lines, rehabilitation facilities, surveillance infrastructure. They're not trying to win, they're trying to make us look vulnerable. I focused on the holographic display. showing the visitor's last known position. The anomaly is the catalyst. His presence gives them hope that the regime can be challenged. Then we remove that hope, Diana said. Though her voice lacked its usual conviction, the visitor's words haunted her like battlefield ghosts. If the positions were reversed, would you want Clark to give up? She'd spent the flight from Tricorner District trying to silence that question. But Amazon training valued truth, and the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Regime Superman studied the tactical display with the cold assessment of a general counting casualties. Victor prioritized the rehabilitation center raid. If the insurgency frees those prisoners, we'll have to re-educate them. Flash, you're on supply depot interdiction. I want Green Arrow self-contained, not killed. We prove we're not monsters by showing mercy even to terrorists. Mercy. The visitor's voice echoed from the command center's entrance. He'd followed them from the fortress, refusing to let the confrontation end without resolution. Is that what you call it? Imprisoning people for thought crimes and calling it rehabilitation. Regime enforcers moved to intercept, but Superman raised a hand. Let him speak. Let everyone hear what the insurgency's new weapon thinks. Passes for moral authority. He turned to face his dimensional mirror with the bearing of someone accustomed to public performance. You've seen the regime's peace. Traveled through cities where children play without fear, where no one locks their doors, where crime is a historical curiosity. And you call that imprisonment? What does freedom look like in your universe? The visitor descended slowly, aware that every word was being recorded, transmitted, analyzed by millions of citizens learning that Superman had competition. Freedom looks like risk, he said clearly. Like people choosing their own paths and sometimes failing. Like governments that answer to citizens, not gods. Like the messy, dangerous, beautiful possibility that humans might surprise you with their capacity for good, if you give them the chance. Capacity for good, Regime Superman repeated mockingly. Let me show you humanity's capacity. He gestured, and Cyborg pulled up archived footage, the Joker's greatest hits. Atrocities humanity had permitted through legal technicality and systemic failure. That's what your freedom produces. That's the world you're fighting to restore. Tell me, how many of these victims would have chosen your beautiful possibility over the regime's protection? The visitor watched the footage without flinching. Some of them would have chosen freedom anyway. Would have said that safety, purchased with liberty, isn't safety at all. It's just a prettier cage. He met Regime Superman's gaze across the command center. But you never gave them the choice. You decided for them. Because deep down, you don't trust anyone but yourself. That's not leadership, Clark. That's narcissism wrapped in trauma. The command center went silent. Regime personnel exchanged glances, uncertain how to process the accusation that their savior's motivations were psychological rather than philosophical. Diana's hand moved to her sword unconsciously, her warrior's instincts recognizing a truth she'd been avoiding. You want to know what I don't trust? Regime Superman said quietly, dangerously. I don't trust a species that created the Holocaust, that dropped atomic bombs, that systematically destroyed its own environment for profit. I don't trust governments that legalized slavery and denied women rights and permitted genocide through bureaucratic indifference. His heat vision began to glow. I don't trust humanity because humanity has proven, repeatedly, that without guidance, without control, it defaults to cruelty, tribalism, and self-destruction. That's not narcissism. That's empirical observation. It's selective observation, the visitor countered. You're remembering humanity's worst moments and ignoring its best. The people who fought fascism, who ended slavery, who struggled for rights against overwhelming odds. The everyday heroes who choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. The parents who sacrifice for children. The strangers who help strangers. The millions of quiet acts of decency that don't make your surveillance reports because they're not threats to control. Anecdotes, Regime Superman dismissed. Individual virtue doesn't negate systemic corruption. For every person choosing kindness, there are 10 choosing violence, exploitation, or apathetic complicity. The math doesn't support your optimism. The math isn't everything, the visitor said. Humans aren't equations to be solved. There. An alarm screamed through the command center. Cyborg screens erupted with emergency data. Sir, Massive energy signature detected in the Tricorner district. The insurgency's using our distraction to, he stopped. His mechanical eye widening with something approaching shock. They're not attacking. They're broadcasting. The main screen shifted to show Batman standing in Tricorner Central Square, surrounded by the families the regime had threatened. Insurgency fighters formed a protective perimeter, their weapons aimed outward but their posture defensive. And at Batman's side stood the rescued prisoners. From Central City's rehabilitation center, men and women still, carrying the hollow-eyed trauma of thought correction, living proof of what regime mercy actually meant. Citizens of Earth. Batman's voice carried across every communication channel the insurgency had managed to hijack. For 5 years, you've been told that the regime keeps you safe. That Superman's control is the only barrier between you and chaos. That freedom is dangerous and submission is love. He gestured to the prisoners beside him. I want you to meet some people who experienced that love firsthand. A woman stepped forward, her movements jerky with rehabilitated compliance. My name was Sarah Chun, she said, her voice flat from months of neural reconditioning. I was a journalist who wrote an article questioning regime transparency. They came for me at night, took me to a facility where they adjusted my thinking, made me understand that questioning authority was selfish, that Superman knows best, that independent thought is dangerous. Her eyes, dead, empty, stared at the camera. They cured me of freedom. Now I only want to serve. More prisoners spoke. Each testimony a horror of sanitized language describing psychological destruction. Teachers who'd taught unauthorized history. Parents who'd objected to surveillance in schools. Artists who'd created work the regime deemed destabilizing. All of them rehabilitated into perfect compliance. Their personalities stripped away and replaced with programmed devotion. This is Superman's mercy, Batman said quietly. This is what happens when you disagree with a god. When you exercise the freedom he claims to protect. When you remember that humans are supposed to think for themselves. He looked directly at the camera, speaking to the visitor though the entire world watched. There's a Superman in this district right now. Not the tyrant who created this hell, but one who remembers what the symbol used to mean. Who represents a universe where heroes trusted humanity instead of ruling it. I'm asking him, publicly, so everyone can see. Will you stand with us? Will you prove that Superman can be more than regime propaganda? The command center erupted into controlled chaos. Regime personnel tracking the broadcast source, calculating interdiction strategies, preparing countermeasures. Diana moved toward the exit, ready to silence the transmission with Amazon efficiency. Cyborg's fingers flew across holographic interfaces, trying to jam signals that Batman had designed to be unjammable. But regime Superman stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. The prisoners, his mercy, his compassion, his measured response to dissent, exposed as the horror they actually were. And the visitor, poised at the center of it all, represented the choice every citizen would now make. Believe the regime's justifications, or trust the evidence of systematically destroyed minds. You have to stop him, Diana said urgently. Clark, if that broadcast continues, it'll destabilize everything we've built. Citizens will question. Doubt will spread. The peace is built on lies, the visitor interrupted. On rehabilitation centers that erase personalities. On surveillance that treats everyone as potential criminals. On a system where disagreeing with Superman is literally a thought crime. He rose into the air, making his choice visible to every camera the insurgency had activated. Batman asked me a question. Here's my answer. He flew toward Tricorner District at supersonic speed, leaving a sonic boom and a declaration that the command center's screens couldn't ignore. Regime Superman watched his mirror choose the insurgency, choose chaos over order, choose the beautiful possibility of human freedom over the sterile certainty of divine control. He's making a mistake, Regime Superman said, but his voice carried doubt for the first time in 5 years. The prisoner's testimonies played on loop across the screens, evidence he couldn't simply dismiss as insurgency propaganda because his own rehabilitation protocols had created them. Those people were dangerous, were spreading misinformation, were destabilizing the peace that keeps billions safe. We're thinking, Diana said quietly, and Regime Superman turned to her in shock. She was looking at the screens with an expression he hadn't seen since before the regime. Doubt, horror, the beginning of recognition. Clark, those people weren't terrorists. They were teachers and journalists and parents. And we broke them, made them into something less than human because they asked questions. Diana, not now. Yes, now, she interrupted, and her voice carried Amazon steel. I've been avoiding this for 5 years, telling myself that rehabilitation was justice, that thought correction was protection, that we were being strong instead of monstrous. She met his gaze directly, but I watched him refuse to fight me, watched him offer redemption when he should have offered combat. And I realized he's what you used to be, what we all used to be, before we convinced ourselves that love meant control and protection meant dominion. Diana, if you're having doubts, I'm having truth, she corrected. And I was raised to value truth above comfort, above loyalty, above even love. Her hand moved to her sword, and for one terrible moment, Regime Superman thought she might draw it against him. Instead, she removed her regime insignia, the modified Superman symbol that marked her as his enforcer, and let it fall to the command center floor. I'm sorry, Clark. I loved you enough to become your weapon, but I won't love you enough to become your monster anymore. She launched through the command center's ceiling, leaving shattered crystal and stunned silence. Regime enforcers stared at the fallen insignia, processing the impossible. Wonder Woman, the regime's most loyal soldier, had defected. The psychological impact was devastating. If Diana could doubt, if the warrior princess who'd stood beside Superman through 5 years of escalating atrocities could recognize the truth, what did that say about the regime's moral foundation? Sir, Cyborg said carefully, his mechanical voice barely masking human uncertainty. Diana's biometrics show she's heading toward Tricorner District. She's joining them. What are your orders? Regime Superman stood alone, in the command center, surrounded by loyal personnel but fundamentally isolated by the weight of absolute power. The visitor had crossed dimensions to challenge him. Batman's broadcast had exposed his rehabilitation horrors. And now Diana, the woman who'd loved him enough to enable tyranny, had chosen truth over loyalty. He could crush them, could fly to Tricorner at full speed, heat vision blazing, and eliminate every insurgency fighter before they could scatter, could prove that defiance meant death, that Superman's authority was absolute, that the regime would tolerate no opposition. The old Superman would have rejected that option immediately. The new Superman had executed the Joker for less. But something the visitor said haunted him. You're trying to punish the world for hurting you. Was that true? Had 5 years of the regime been elaborate revenge dressed as compassion? Had he convinced 7 billion people to submit because it made him feel in control after Metropolis taught him how little control anyone actually had? Had Diana seen through the lie he'd been telling himself, that tyranny was love if the tyrant believed himself righteous? Sir, Cyborg prompted again. Orders. Regime Superman looked at his hands, hands that had killed the woman he loved, that had snapped the Joker's neck, that had lobotomized Zash and crippled Connor and executed 100 other threats to his perfect peace. Hands that could reshape the world or destroy it. Hands that had forgotten what it meant to offer help instead of impose will. Pull back all regime forces from Tricorner, he said finally. Let Batman's broadcast continue. Let the people see the prisoners. Let them hear the testimonies. His jaw tightened. And let them choose. The command center erupted in protest. Strategic advisors warning of instability. Military commanders citing protocols. Cyborg's mechanical voice noting that allowing dissent would undermine the regime's foundational authority. But Regime Superman silenced them all with a gesture. I said let them choose, he repeated. For 5 years, I've made every choice for them. Decided what they could think, where they could go, what information they could access. Convinced myself that control was compassion and submission was salvation. He turned to face his command staff, and his expression carried the weight of a god discovering his mortality. The visitor says I don't trust humanity. He's right. But if Diana, who stood beside me through everything, can recognize that I've become what we fought against, maybe. He couldn't finish the thought. Maybe you were wrong. Cyborg suggested carefully. Maybe I was terrified. Regime Superman corrected. terrified that without absolute control, I'd lose someone else. That without perfect surveillance, another metropolis would burn. That without enforced compliance, the world would prove humanity's worst. Impulses were stronger than its best. He moved toward the exit, cape dragging across crystal floors. But terror isn't wisdom, and preventing all suffering by eliminating all choice isn't salvation. It's just slower death. He flew toward Tricorner District, not to attack, but to witness. To see what happened when Superman stopped controlling and started trusting. To learn if redemption was possible for someone who'd spent 5 years proving the Joker right about what one bad day could do. Behind him, the command center processed the unprecedented order. Regime forces pulling back. Surveillance maintaining observation, but not interdiction. The entire apparatus of global control, pausing to allow one moment of genuine human choice. What would the citizens do when their divine protector stopped protecting them from themselves? The answer would determine whether Superman could ever be more than a symbol of tyranny, or if the visitor's hope was as naive as Regime Clark had convinced himself. Tricorner District had become an amphitheater for humanity's judgment, its crumbling buildings forming a natural arena where citizens gathered, despite the danger, drawn by the broadcast that had pierced the regime's informational monopoly. Thousands filled the square and surrounding streets. Not just insurgency supporters, but ordinary people who'd lived under the regime's peace for 5 years and were now witnessing something unprecedented. Superman's authority questioned, his methods exposed, his moral certainty shattered by truth. The visitor stood beside Batman on the makeshift stage, flanked by rehabilitated prisoners whose hollow testimonies had stripped away the regime's compassionate veneer. Green Arrow maintained perimeter security with his cell. Arrows knocked, but not drawn. Defense, not aggression. A statement that the insurgency sought truth rather than bloodshed. Black Canary coordinated evacuation routes in case the regime struck. And Harley Quinn, perched on a ruined column with manic energy barely contained, watched the skies for incoming gods with a grin that suggested she'd welcome the chaos either way. Then Wonder Woman descended. The crowd's reaction was instant panic, parents grabbing children, civilians scrambling for cover, insurgency fighters raising weapons in futile gestures against a warrior goddess who'd spent 5 years enforcing the regime's will with Olympian efficiency. Diana landed 30 feet from the stage, her armor still bearing the regime's colors, but her insignia missing, torn away in the command center. She carried her sword, but left it sheathed, her posture that of a warrior approaching under flag of truce. "Diana," Batman said carefully, his hand moving toward the kryptonite trigger he'd recalibrated for contingencies. "If you're here to silence the broadcast, I'm here to hear it," she interrupted, and her voice carried across the square with Themysciran authority. "All of it. Every testimony, every accusation, every truth I've been avoiding, because love blinded me to justice." She moved closer to the stage, and the visitor noted how her warrior's bearing had shifted, still dangerous, still powerful, but no longer carrying the rigid certainty of absolute conviction. "I stood beside Clark for 5 years, told myself we were saving the world, that rehabilitation was mercy, that surveillance was protection, that the regime's peace was worth any price." Her eyes found the rehabilitated prisoners, and visible pain crossed her immortal features. "I was wrong." The square went silent. Wonder Woman, the regime's enforcer, Superman's partner, the warrior princess who'd justified 1,000 atrocities, had spoken the words everyone thought impossible. The psychological impact rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. If Diana could admit the regime's evil, if she could choose truth over loyalty, then perhaps the entire moral framework they'd accepted for 5 years was built on lies. "You sided with the insurgency?" A civilian called out, voice shaking with fear and desperate hope. "I sided with truth," Diana corrected. "With the Amazon values I abandoned when I chose love over honor. With the recognition that warriors protect, they don't conquer. That strength without wisdom is just tyranny with divine sanction." She turned to the visitor, and her expression held something between gratitude and shame. "You asked me if I'd want Clark to give up if our positions were reversed. The answer haunted me, because I realized that if I were the tyrant and he was the hero, I'd want him to fight. to believe in me, to remind me what Amazon honor actually demands. She drew her sword, not in threat, but in oath. I swear on Themyscira, on Hippolyta's teachings, on every value I've betrayed, that I will oppose the regime until Superman remembers what the symbol means, or until he kills me for choosing truth. The visitor stepped forward, meeting her halfway with the same extended hand he'd offered. Regime Superman in the fortress. Welcome back, Diana. The world's been missing Wonder Woman. She clasped his hand with a warrior's grip, and the gesture, immortal, princess accepting dimensional visitor as ally, became the broadcast's defining image. Cameras captured it from every angle. Two gods choosing freedom over control, hope over fear, the difficult path over the easy tyranny. And across the planet, citizens watching in secret, risking regime attention to witness the impossible, felt something they hadn't experienced in 5 years. The possibility of change. This is a trick, someone shouted from the crowd, a regime loyalist. Voice sharp with panic. Wonder Woman would never betray Superman. This is insurgency manipulation. Fear toxin or magic or… No magic, Diana interrupted, addressing the crowd directly. No manipulation. Just 5 years of cognitive dissonance finally cracking under the weight of evidence. I couldn't ignore. She gestured to the rehabilitated prisoners. I told myself these people were dangerous, that their re-education was necessary, that questioning the regime meant choosing chaos over peace. But look at them. Really look. These aren't terrorists. They're teachers and parents and journalists, whose crime was thinking independently, and I helped destroy them. A rehabilitated prisoner stepped forward, a man in his 40s whose eyes had regained some spark during the broadcast. My name is Marcus Webb, he said, his voice still carrying the flat effect of neural reconditioning, but fighting for personality beneath. I was a history teacher, taught my students about the American Revolution, about civil rights movements, about times when people challenged authority because authority was wrong. He met Diana's gaze directly. You came for me personally, told me that teaching dissent was radicalizing youth, that the regime's version of history was the only version that mattered. You supervised my rehabilitation for 3 months, watched them erase who I was and replace it with this. His hand trembled. And you believed you were being merciful. Diana's warrior composure cracked. I did believe it, she whispered. I'm sorry. It's inadequate, but I'm sorry. I convinced myself that erasing your ability to question was protecting you from dangerous ideas, that making you compliant was compassion, that love for Clark justified becoming his weapon. She addressed the crowd again, voice strengthening with Amazon steel. That's how tyranny works. Not through mustache-twirling villains who know they're evil, but through people who convince themselves that control is love, that surveillance is safety, that absolute power wielded by the right person can finally fix a broken world. But there is no right person, the visitor added, stepping beside Diana in solidarity. No one pure enough, wise enough, or strong enough to wield absolute power without corruption. That's not cynicism, it's human nature, even Kryptonian nature. He looked up at the sky where he knew regime Superman was watching. Clark convinced himself he was the exception, that his grief and trauma somehow qualified him to override everyone else's choices. But all he did was prove the oldest lesson in history: power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. Batman moved to the front of the stage, his presence commanding despite lacking superhuman abilities. 5 years ago, when Superman executed the Joker, half the world celebrated. Finally, someone with the power to stop the cycle of violence had used it. Finally, a hero who wouldn't let monsters hide behind legal technicalities. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd fought that celebration alone. But you can't build justice on execution, can't create lasting peace through fear, can't establish freedom by eliminating choice. The regime's peace is the peace of the graveyard, perfect stillness purchased with psychological death. Then what's the alternative? Another voice called out, not hostile but genuinely questioning. Before the regime, crime was everywhere. Wars continued. Children starved while governments debated. Superman ended all that. What happens if we tear down the regime? Do we just return to chaos? We return to possibility, the visitor answered, to the chance that humans can govern themselves. That democracy, for all its flaws, is better than benevolent dictatorship. That mistakes made freely teach lessons that obedience under. You're keeping them safe from physical danger by exposing them to psychological imprisonment, trading one threat for another. And when they're adults in a world where Superman's decided every outcome and made every choice, will they even know how to be human anymore? Elena's expression wavered between conviction and doubt. The visitor pressed forward, not aggressively, but with the gentle insistence of someone who'd spent years inspiring rather than commanding. In my universe, I have a conversation with every parent who asks me to guarantee their children's safety. I tell them, I'll do everything I can. I'll fight the monsters and stop the disasters and stand between humanity and threats they can't handle alone. But I can't, won't, remove every risk from their children's lives. Because kids who never face danger never learn courage. People who never experience consequences never develop wisdom. Humanity that's completely protected from itself never grows up. But they die. Elena shot back. Children die from the risks you allow. Parents bury sons and daughters because Superman was too principled to prevent every tragedy. How is that better than the regime's protection? The visitor's expression reflected the weight of every life he'd failed to save. Every tragedy he'd arrived too late to prevent. It's not better, he admitted, and the honesty shocked the crowd. It's harder. Messier, full of grief and failure and the horrible knowledge that sometimes people die, despite your best efforts. But it's also real. It allows growth. It preserves dignity. It maintains the fundamental truth that humans are people, not pets to be protected from themselves. Dignity doesn't matter to the dead, the regime loyalist argued. No, Batman interjected. But it matters to the living. And a life lived in absolute security but complete. Subjugation isn't really life, it's just extended survival. We're not fighting to restore the world as it was before the regime. That world had real problems, real injustices, real suffering. We're fighting to give humanity the chance to solve those problems themselves. To prove that people don't need a God King making every decision. That democracy, for all its flaws and failures, is worth preserving because the alternative, benevolent tyranny, always becomes malevolent eventually. Eventually, Diana added, her voice carrying Amazon certainty. It already has. The regime started with executing the Joker, a monster who deserved punishment. Then it expanded to executing other villains. Then imprisoning dissenters. Then rehabilitating anyone who questioned. Then surveillance on everyone. Then thought crime prosecution. She swept her arm across the crowd. Where does it end? When does Superman stop finding new threats that require new restrictions? When does the regime's peace finally satisfy its own definition of safety? Never, the visitor answered. Because absolute power always finds new threats to justify itself. New enemies to combat. New restrictions to implement for the greater good. The regime isn't an endpoint, it's a perpetual expansion of control dressed as protection. And every generation that grows up under it will know less freedom, less autonomy, less humanity than the one before. Until finally, you're not a civilization anymore. You're just livestock that Superman tends. Thunder rumbled overhead. Not natural weather, but the sonic boom of a god arriving. Regime Superman descended into the square, landing 50 feet from the stage with controlled precision. The crowd scattered in panic. But the visitor, Diana, and Batman held their ground. This was the confrontation 5 years of tyranny had built toward. The symbol of hope facing the symbol's corruption, with humanity watching to see which version of Superman would define the future. I heard everything, Regime Superman said, his voice carrying across the district with Kryptonian power. The testimonies, the accusations, Diana's defection, your speeches about dignity and freedom and the beautiful possibility of human choice. His heat vision flickered dangerously. And I came to tell you all something the insurgency doesn't want you to know. He gestured, and holographic displays materialized across the square. Crime statistics, mortality rates, quality of life indices from before and after the regime. The data was undeniable. Violent crime reduced by 99.7%. War deaths eliminated. Poverty decreased by 87%. Life expectancy increased by 12 years globally. The regime's peace, whatever its methods, had objectively improved human welfare by every measurable metric. That's the reality you're fighting to destroy, Regime Superman said. Those numbers represent millions of lives saved, billions of people living longer, safer, more prosperous lives than they could have under the old system. You call it tyranny. I call it the first time in history that someone with actual power chose to use it for humanity's benefit instead of posturing about principles while people died. His eyes found the visitor. You're not fighting for freedom. You're fighting to restore the illusion that humanity can govern itself, an illusion that cost 7 million lives in Metropolis alone. The crowd murmured, the data's impact undeniable. The regime's peace wasn't just propaganda. It was measurable, documented, real. Whatever Superman had become, whatever methods he'd used, the objective outcome was improved human welfare. Could the insurgency really claim moral high ground when their victory would mean returning to a world with higher mortality, more suffering, less stability? The visitor looked at the data, processed its truth, and made his choice. You're right, he said, and the admission shocked everyone. The regime has saved lives, reduced suffering, created measurable improvements in human welfare by every statistical metric. He met his counterparts gaze across the square. But statistics aren't everything. Survival isn't the same as thriving. And a longer life lived in psychological chains isn't better than a shorter life lived with dignity and choice. That's easy to say when you're not the one burying your child, Elena called out, her voice shaking. When you're not the mother who'd trade anything, including freedom, to keep her babies safe. You're right, the visitor said again. It is easy for me to say. I don't have children, don't have the parental instinct to protect at any cost. But I do know this. The children growing up under the regime won't just be safe. They'll be broken. They'll be people who've never learned to think independently, question authority, or make difficult choices. And when they're adults, they won't be capable of the freedom you're trading away. They'll be perfect subjects for Superman's kingdom. Grateful slaves who don't even know they're imprisoned. Regime Superman's expression hardened. Better grateful slaves who are alive than free corpses who died for abstract principles. That's the choice, and you know it. Freedom or safety, liberty or life. Choose. That's a false choice, Batman interrupted. And you know it. Humans can have both freedom and safety. Not perfect safety, but reasonable security with preserved liberty. It requires work, vigilance, systems of accountability. But it's possible. The regime just convinced everyone it wasn't because you were too traumatized to try. I was tested. Regime Superman roared, and the square trembled with his rage. I lost everything, and I learned that the only way to prevent that suffering was to accept the responsibility that comes with power. Full, unrestricted, absolute responsibility. His heat vision blazed. You call that tyranny. I call that finally being the hero Earth needed instead of the symbol you preferred. The visitor rose into the air, meeting his counterpart at eye level. The crowd watched as two gods prepared for confrontation, as the philosophical warfare threatened to become physical, as the question of what Superman meant would be answered through force rather than argument. But before either could strike, the first gunshot rang out. The bullet came from somewhere in the crowd, a desperate act by someone who'd lost too much to the regime or feared losing too much to the insurgency. It struck regime Superman's shoulder with the futility of rain against mountain stone, ricocheting harmlessly into the air. But the psychological impact was instantaneous and profound. Someone had tried to kill Superman. Not the visitor, not Diana, not the insurgency's leadership, but an ordinary citizen driven to violence by the weight of impossible choices. Regime Superman's heat vision flared reflexively, tracking the bullet's trajectory back to its source with Kryptonian precision. A man in his 30s, face twisted with grief and rage, stood with a smoking pistol, and the hollow eyes of someone who'd already decided death was preferable to submission. Regime enforcers moved to apprehend him, but Superman raised a hand, stopping them with absolute authority. "Who did you lose?" Regime Superman asked, his voice carrying across the silent square. Not angry, resigned, weary. The tone of a god who'd heard this story too many times. "My brother," the man said, his voice breaking. "Daniel Keats. He was a philosopher, taught ethics at the university, wrote papers about moral relativism and the dangers of absolute power." Tears streamed down his face. "You came for him 2 years ago," said his teachings were destabilizing, radicalizing students against the regime. They took him to rehabilitation. When he came back, he wasn't Daniel anymore. He was just empty, a shell that smiled and said, Superman was right about everything. The pistol trembled in his hands. He killed himself 6 months later, left a note that said, "Better death than being someone else's puppet." The square remained frozen, every person processing the testimony. Regime Superman's expression cycled through recognition, pain, and finally, the cold calculation of someone weighing individual tragedy against collective welfare. "I remember Daniel Keats," he said quietly. His papers were being used by insurgency recruiters. His philosophical arguments against authority were inspiring domestic terrorism. His ideas were killing people. His ideas were making people think. The man shouted, "And you couldn't tolerate that. Couldn't allow anyone to question whether your perfect peace was worth the price. So you erased him, made him into something compliant and hollow and so broken. He'd rather die than continue being your puppet." He raised the pistol again, knowing it was useless but needing the gesture. "You're not a hero. You're a monster who learned to smile." Regime Superman could have disarmed him in microseconds, could have heat visioned the weapon into slag or frozen it with super breath. But instead, he did something that shocked everyone. He lowered his defenses, stood vulnerable before a man with a gun and the desperation to use it, offering himself as target, acceptance of judgment, or perhaps test of his own commitment to the regime's principles. "Then shoot me," he said. "If you believe I'm a monster, if my death would restore your brother, if killing Superman would free Earth from tyranny, shoot me. I won't stop you." The man's finger tightened on the trigger. The crowd held its collective breath. Diana's hand moved to her sword, torn between protecting the man she'd loved and allowing consequences for 5 years of atrocities. Batman's tactical mind calculated angles and outcomes, and the visitor watched his counterpart offer martyrdom with the recognition that regime Superman still possessed one quality worth saving. He genuinely believed he was right. The man fired. Once, twice, 3 times. Desperation and grief poured into futile bullets that bounced harmlessly off invulnerable flesh. Then the pistol clicked empty, and he collapsed to his knees, sobbing with the brokenhearted exhaustion of someone who'd tried everything and accomplished nothing. Regime Superman approached slowly, kneeling beside the man with unexpected gentleness. "I'm sorry about Daniel," he said, and his voice carried genuine regret. "I'm sorry that helping him meant destroying who he was. I'm sorry the regime's peace came at the cost of your brother's soul." He placed a hand on the man's shoulder with the careful control of someone who'd learned his touch could shatter bones. "But I'm not sorry for building a world where no one else has to bury family members to senseless violence, where no other child has to grow up afraid, where humanity finally has protection from its own worst impulses." Protection, the man spat. You call what you did to Daniel protection? You call erasing people's ability to think independently protection? You call making the entire world into grateful prisoners protection? He looked up at Superman with eyes full of hate and hopeless understanding. You're protecting us from being human, and you can't even see why that's worse than death. The visitor descended, positioning himself between the grieving man and regime Superman. Clark, look at him. Really look. This is what the regime produces. People so desperate, so broken by watching their loved ones erased. That death seems like mercy. Is this the world you wanted to build? Where citizens try to shoot you not because they're violent criminals, but because you've made survival worse than sacrifice. This is one person, regime Superman argued. One tragedy among billions who live safely because of the regime's protection. You can't judge a system by its edge cases. He's not an edge case, Batman said, stepping forward with files that materialized across the holographic displays, thousands of them, each representing someone who'd lost family or friends to rehabilitation, whose loved ones had been erased and replaced with compliant shells. Daniel Keats is one of 47,000 people who've been through regime rehabilitation. Of those, 12,000 never recovered their original personalities. 3,000 committed suicide after release. And the rest? He let the data speak for itself. Thousands of lives destroyed in the name of protecting them. I saved billions, regime Superman said. But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. By sacrificing thousands, the visitor replied. By deciding that some people's autonomy was worth less than other people's safety. By playing God and choosing who got erased for the greater good. He extended his hand to the grieving man, helping him stand. In my universe, when I can't save everyone, when I have to make impossible choices about who lives and dies, you know what keeps me from becoming you? I remember that I don't have the right to decide whose life matters less. That every person, every single individual, has inherent worth that my power doesn't entitle me to override. Then you let people die who could have been saved, regime Superman said flatly. Yes, the visitor admitted. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I arrive too late or make the wrong choice, or fail because I'm not actually omnipotent no matter how much the symbol suggests otherwise. And every single failure haunts me, keeps me up at night, makes me question everything. His voice hardened with conviction. But you know what doesn't haunt me? The knowledge that I erased someone's personality because their ideas threaten my control. The recognition that I've become the dictator I swore to fight. The reality that children are growing up in a world where Superman means submission instead of hope. The crowd was fully engaged now. Citizens who'd lived 5 years under the regime's peace witnessing the philosophical battle for Earth's soul. Some faces showed doubt in the regime's righteousness. Others clung to the security Superman had provided. And many simply looked exhausted, tired of impossible choices, of weighing freedom against safety, of trying to determine which Superman represented the better path. Then Diana spoke, her warrior's voice cutting through the tension. Clark, I stood beside you for 5 years. Told myself we were doing necessary evil for the greater good. That the people we rehabilitated were dangerous. That surveillance was protection. That absolute control was love. She moved to stand beside the visitor, her defection complete and public. But I was wrong. Amazon honor, real honor. Not the corrupted version I convinced myself was virtue, demands. We protect people's right to choose, not make their choices for them. Demands we trust humans to govern themselves, not rule them for their own good. Demands we admit when power has corrupted us beyond redemption. You think I'm beyond redemption? Regime Superman asked, and his voice carried vulnerability beneath the authority. I think you're at a crossroads, Diana replied. You can continue the regime. Continue the executions and rehabilitations and thought crime prosecutions. Continue being the tyrant who believes himself a savior. Or you can step down, face justice for what you've done, help rebuild what we've destroyed. Prove that even gods can admit mistakes and choose differently. Step down, regime Superman repeated, as if testing the concept's weight. Let humanity return to governing itself, to wars and crimes and the chaos that killed Lois and destroyed Metropolis, to the systems that failed so catastrophically. I had to intervene. He looked around the square at faces, reflecting fear, hope, doubt. desperate uncertainty, and trust that they'll somehow manage better this time. Yes, the visitor said simply. Trust them. Believe in them. Remember that Superman's role isn't to rule, it's to inspire. To show humans what they can aspire to, not force them into perfection at gunpoint. Regime Superman stood, silent, processing the impossible request. 5 years of tyranny predicated on the belief that humanity needed control. 5 years of justifying every atrocity as necessary. 5 years of convincing himself that Lois would have understood, would have supported the regime, would have agreed that protecting everyone meant dominating everyone. But she wouldn't have. He knew that, deep in the part of his soul he'd been avoiding. Lois Lane had been a crusader for truth, a journalist who'd fought authority regardless of cost, a woman who'd valued freedom over security every time. If she'd seen what he'd become, if she'd witnessed the rehabilitation, centers and surveillance state and execution of the Joker, she'd have looked at him with those fierce eyes and said, "This isn't you, Clark. This isn't Superman. This is what happens when gods forget they're refugees who got lucky." The visitor saw the crack in his counterpart's certainty. "Clark, I know you're terrified. Terrified that stepping down means another metropolis. That trusting humans means more senseless death. That admitting you were wrong means accepting responsibility. 4 or 5 years of atrocities you can't undo." He moved closer, speaking with the gentle insistence of someone who'd faced the same temptations. "But holding on to power because you're afraid of what happens without you. That's not heroism. That's trauma masquerading as strength. And every day you continue the regime is another day you prove the Joker was right about what one bad day can do. Don't you dare invoke him." Regime Superman snarled, heat vision flaring. "Don't you dare suggest that monster won. I stopped him. Permanently. Ensured he could never hurt anyone again." "You stopped the Joker," the visitor agreed. "But you became what he wanted you to become. A hero who broke. A symbol corrupted. A god who decided humanity needed a master." He spread his hands, showing no threat, just earnest appeal. "He didn't win by killing Lois, Clark. He won by making you forget what Superman means." The square held its breath as Regime Superman's expression cycled through rage, grief, denial, and finally, terrifyingly, recognition. The visitor saw it, the moment his counterpart acknowledged the truth he'd been running from for 5 years. That the regime wasn't justice. That rehabilitation wasn't mercy. That his perfect peace was purchased with humanity's soul. But acknowledgement wasn't acceptance. Recognition wasn't redemption. And Regime Superman had gone too far, done too much, built too elaborate a justification to simply surrender because a dimensional visitor showed him a mirror. "You want me to step down," he said quietly, dangerously, "to face justice for crimes I committed to prevent greater crimes. To let Earth return to the chaos that cost 7 million lives. To prove that Superman can admit mistakes and choose differently." His heat vision charged to maximum intensity. "But what if I'm not wrong? What if the regime is exactly what Earth needs? Flawed but functional, imperfect but effective, tyrannical but ultimately successful at the one thing that matters, keeping people alive." "Then you've already lost," the visitor replied. "Because you've made survival more important than living, security more valuable than freedom, existence more precious than dignity. You've reduced humanity to livestock and called it love." Regime Superman's restraint shattered. He launched forward with Kryptonian fury, not at the visitor but toward the sky. Escape. Rejection of the impossible choice. Refusal to face the recognition that he'd become the monster wearing Superman's face. But Diana moved to intercept. Her Amazon speed and warrior's instinct positioning her between Regime Superman and retreat. "Clark, stop," she commanded, sword drawn and stance perfect. "Running doesn't change what you've become, doesn't undo the rehabilitation centers, or resurrect the executed, or restore the personalities you've erased. Face it. Face us. Face the possibility that you're wrong and I'm right, and we've spent 5 years building hell while calling it heaven." Regime Superman froze mid-flight, hovering before Diana with an expression of such profound betrayal it would have broken a weaker woman. "You're choosing them over me," he said, voice cracking. "Over us. Over everything we built together." "I'm choosing truth over lies," Diana corrected. honor over complicity, the warrior's path over the tyrant's. And yes, that means opposing you. It means acknowledging that love blinded me to tyranny, that I stood beside a monster, because I convinced myself he was still a hero. Tears streamed down her immortal face, but her sword remained steady. I loved you, Clark. Part of me always will. But I won't love you enough to enable more atrocities. Won't stand beside you while you destroy what Superman should represent. Won't let you continue breaking people and calling it protection. The confrontation crystallized into its essential elements. Regime Superman floating before Diana's blade. The visitor watching from below with heat vision ready. Batman coordinating insurgency forces should this become the final battle. And thousands of citizens witnessing the moment that would determine Earth's future. Would Superman choose redemption or double down on tyranny? Would Diana's defection inspire him or enrage him? Would the symbol finally mean hope again? Or would it be permanently corrupted by 5 years of fear? Then Flash arrived in a crackle of yellow lightning. His appearance so sudden even Superman's reflexes barely registered it. Barry Allen, who'd spent 5 years running the regime's errands and burying his doubts beneath speed and obedience, stood between all parties with an expression of absolute misery. "Stop," he said, voice shaking. "All of you, just stop, please." He looked at Regime Superman with desperate pleading. "Clark, I've been listening to the testimonies, the data, the arguments, and I've been running scenarios, thousands of them, processing every possible outcome at super speed." His voice broke. "Diana's right. The visitor's right. Bruce is right. We've become what we fought against. And every day I've run your errands. Every mission I've completed for the regime. I've been complicit in tyranny because I was too afraid to admit we were wrong." "Barry," Regime Superman started. "I'm sorry," Flash interrupted. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to oppose you 5 years ago when you executed the Joker. I'm sorry I ran when you needed someone to make you stop. I'm sorry. I've been your accomplice when I should have been your conscience." He removed his regime insignia, letting it fall beside Diana's. "But I'm done. Done enabling. Done pretending the regime is justice. Done choosing security over the basic dignity of human choice." The defections were cascading now, Diana, then Flash, each abandoning the regime publicly and irreversibly. Regime Superman watched his support crumble, his moral foundation shatter, his carefully constructed justification dissolve under the weight of truth. He could force their compliance, could heat vision, Flash into submission or imprison Diana in the Phantom Zone, could eliminate every dissenter, and prove through absolute power that the regime's authority was unchallengeable. But doing so would prove every accusation correct, would demonstrate that the regime relied on force rather than consent, fear rather than inspiration, domination rather than protection, would show the world that Superman had become exactly what the visitor claimed, a tyrant who'd forgotten what the symbol meant. "I need time," Regime Superman said finally, the words tasting like defeat. "Time to think, to process, to determine if you're right and I'm wrong or if you're naive and I'm necessary." He looked at the visitor with something approaching respect. "You've crossed dimensions to challenge me, turned Diana and Barry, exposed the rehabilitation centers, made me question everything I've built. That's more than anyone else has managed in 5 years. I'm not trying to defeat you," the visitor said gently. "I'm trying to save you, to remind you that Superman can endure the worst loss imaginable and still choose hope over control, that you don't have to be the regime to honor Lois, that the best way to make her death mean something is to prove grief doesn't have to breed tyranny." Regime Superman said nothing more. He rose into the sky, leaving sonic booms and shattered certainty, flying toward the fortress where he could think without the weight of judgment, where he could face the recognition that perhaps, the visitor was right, and 5 years of tyranny had been elaborate denial of a simple truth Superman had broken. And instead of healing, he'd tried to break the world into matching his trauma. The square erupted into chaos, citizens arguing, insurgency celebrating, regime loyalists panicking, the entire planet watching. As Superman's authority cracked, Diana and Barry stood with the visitor, 3 gods who'd chosen freedom over control, risk over certainty. the possibility of redemption over the comfort of tyranny. But the war wasn't over. Regime infrastructure remained. Cyborg maintained surveillance. Rehabilitation centers still processed dissidents. And somewhere in the Arctic, a broken god tried to determine if stepping down meant salvation or surrender. The next move would determine everything. The Fortress of Solitude had become a mausoleum of memories, its crystalline architecture reflecting 1,000 images of the man Superman used to be, photographs of Lois, recordings of laughter that would never sound again, holographic reconstructions of Metropolis before it burned. Regime Superman stood alone in the central chamber. Surrounded by monuments to grief he'd transformed into justification for tyranny. 5 years of convincing himself that control was love, that domination was protection, that the regime honored Lois rather than desecrated her memory. He'd been staring at her photograph for hours, trying to remember what she'd actually believed rather than what he'd convinced himself she would have supported. Lois Lane, crusader for truth, fighter against authority, journalist who'd exposed corruption regardless of personal cost. Would she have stood beside him when he executed the Joker? Would she have supported rehabilitation centers that erased personalities? Would she have looked at the surveillance state and perfect compliance and seen salvation rather than dystopia? No. The answer was no, had always been no, would eternally be no. Lois would have opposed the regime from its first moment, would have written exposés about thought crime and rehabilitation horrors, would have stood with Batman's insurgency because freedom mattered more than security, dignity more than survival, truth more than comfortable lies. She would have looked at what Clark had become and said the words he'd been avoiding for 5 years. This isn't you. This is what the Joker wanted. And every day you continue being him proves he won. The visitor's words echoed through the fortress like accusations from the grave. You didn't lose Lois. You lost faith that humans could be better than their worst moment. She's been gone 5 years, Regime Superman said to the empty chamber, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a god discovering his mortality. And every day I've missed her. Every morning I wake up and remember she's dead, that I killed her. That 7 million people died because I wasn't strong enough to resist the Joker's manipulation. His fists clenched. I built the regime to ensure no one else would experience that loss, to create a world where grief like mine was impossible because I'd eliminated the causes: crime, war, chaos, the human propensity for senseless violence. But you can't eliminate grief without eliminating life, the visitor's voice said from the entrance. He'd followed at a respectful distance, giving his counterpart time to process before engaging in what both knew would be their final confrontation. Can't prevent all loss without preventing all growth. Can't guarantee perfect safety without accepting perfect stagnation. Regime Superman didn't turn, but his enhanced senses tracked every detail, heartbeat steady, breathing calm, posture non-aggressive but ready. The visitor had come not to fight but to witness, to offer whatever possibility of redemption remained after 5 years of atrocities. You followed me to my fortress, to my sanctuary, to the one place I thought I could think without judgment. I followed because I know what you're considering, the visitor said, moving into the chamber with careful respect for the space and its meaning. You're thinking about stepping down, admitting you were wrong, facing justice for what you've done, and simultaneously, you're thinking about doubling down, proving through absolute power that the regime's peace is worth any price, eliminating me and Diana and everyone who opposes you to demonstrate that Superman's authority is unchallengeable. He stopped beside the photograph of Lois, studying her captured smile. Both paths are available. Both have a terrible logic. Only one honors what she actually believed. You didn't know her, Regime Superman said, but the words lacked heat. No, the visitor agreed. But I know my Lois. And unless this universe's version was fundamentally different. She was a woman who valued truth above comfort, freedom above security, dignity above survival. A journalist who'd spent her career exposing powerful people who claimed to act for the greater good. A crusader who understood that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. He met his counterpart's gaze in the reflection. If she were here now, if you could ask her opinion on the regime, what would she say? Regime Superman's facade finally cracked completely. She'd hate it, he whispered. Would hate what I've become. would look at the rehabilitation centers and surveillance state and thought crime prosecutions and see everything she'd spent her life fighting against, would write an expose titled, How Superman Became Big Brother, and publish it knowing I'd come for her. His voice broke. Would choose death over watching me rule the world and calling it love. Then why continue? The visitor asked gently. If you know she'd oppose the regime, if you recognize that you've become what she fought against, why not step down? Face justice? Help rebuild what you've destroyed. Prove that Superman can admit mistakes and choose differently. Because stepping down means admitting, I destroyed 7 billion people's freedom for nothing. Regime Superman roared, whirling to face his mirror. Means acknowledging that every execution, every rehabilitation, every act of tyranny was just me trying to punish the world for hurting me. Means accepting that the Joker won, that one bad day broke. Superman and everything after was elaborate denial. His heat vision blazed with barely controlled power. I can't face that. Can't look at what I've done and admit it was all trauma masquerading as justice. Can't accept that I've spent 5 years being the villain while calling myself the hero. You can, the visitor insisted. It's never too late. Even after everything, the executions, the regime, the broken people and shattered trust, it's never too late to choose redemption. To prove that being Superman means admitting when you're wrong and doing the hard work of making it right. By doing what? Regime Superman demanded. Dismantling the regime and watching Earth descend into chaos? Letting wars restart and crime resurge and all the suffering. I prevented return because principles matter more than lives. Facing trial for crimes I committed to save billions? Spending the rest of my existence in the phantom zone while humanity proves it can't govern itself? His voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting. Or I continue the regime. Eliminate you and everyone who opposes me. Prove through absolute power that Superman's peace is non-negotiable. Make Diana and Barry understand they chose wrong. Show Earth that dissent means rehabilitation and rebellion means elimination. The choice crystallized with terrible clarity. Redemption or escalation. Admitting failure or doubling down on tyranny. Proving Superman could choose hope even after becoming despair. Or demonstrating that once broken, God stayed broken. If you choose escalation, the visitor said quietly, I'll stop you. Whatever it takes. I didn't cross dimensions to watch another universe fall to tyranny. Didn't inspire Diana and Barry to defect just to let their courage be punished. Didn't expose the rehabilitation centers and challenge the regime's authority to surrender when it matters most. His heat vision began to glow, matching his counterpart's power exactly. We're equally matched. Clark. Same abilities, same powers, same Kryptonian biology. The fight will be catastrophic. People will die, cities might fall, and in the end, will prove nothing except that God's fighting over humanity's future is exactly what Darkseid does, what tyrants do, what Superman should never do. Then what's the alternative? Regime Superman asked, and his voice carried genuine desperation. I can't step down, can't face what I've done, can't admit to billions of people that their savior was actually their jailer, can't accept that Lois died and I responded by becoming what we both fought against. So what do? You start small, the visitor said. You don't dismantle the entire regime today. You don't face ultimate judgment immediately. You begin by making one right choice. Then another. Then another. You close one rehabilitation center. Free one political prisoner. Admit one mistake publicly. And you build from there. Day by day, choice by choice. Toward the Superman you used to be. Regime Superman stared at his mirror, seeing not an enemy but a reflection of the path not taken. The visitor represented everything he could have been. A Superman who'd endured loss and chosen healing over revenge. Inspiration over domination, hope over control. Standing before that impossible mirror, Regime Clark faced the most difficult choice of his existence. Continue being the tyrant he'd convinced himself was necessary, or take the first terrifying step toward redemption by admitting he was wrong. One right choice, he repeated slowly. Then another, until he couldn't finish the thought. Couldn't imagine the Superman waiting at the end of that impossible journey. Until you're someone Lois would recognize. The visitor finished for him. Someone who honors her memory by proving grief doesn't have to breed tyranny. Someone who shows the universe that Superman means hope. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. For a long moment, the fortress held its breath. Two supermen stood in monument to grief and possibility, surrounded by crystalline memories of the woman whose death had fractured reality in two paths of light and darkness. Outside, the world watched through hijacked broadcasts and insurgency transmissions, waiting to see if their god would choose redemption or escalation, freedom or further tyranny. Then alarms screamed through the fortress. Cyborg's voice, mechanical and urgent. Sir. Massive energy signature detected. Boom tube opening. Apocalypse signature. Multiple contacts. It's the transmission cut to static as Darkseid's invasion force materialized across Earth's major cities. The Lord of Apocalypse had been watching, waiting for this moment. Superman divided. The regime cracking, Earth's defenses weakened by civil war. He'd seen opportunity in chaos and moved, with the calculated precision of a conqueror who'd raised 1,000 worlds. Parademons filled the skies of Metropolis. Gotham, Star City, Central City, millions of them. Overwhelming local defenses with numbers and savagery. Furies descended on strategic targets. Granny Goodness leading assault on the Hall of Justice. DSOD targeting rehabilitation centers to study Superman's thought control methods. Calabac crushing regime infrastructure with brutal efficiency. And somewhere, Darkseid himself prepared to claim Earth as his latest conquest, to demonstrate what true tyranny looked like compared to Superman's amateur authoritarianism. The Visitor and regime Superman stared at the tactical displays in horror. Their philosophical warfare. Their debate about freedom and security. Their confrontation over what Superman meant, all rendered instantly irrelevant by invasion. From a god who'd never pretended his control was love. He's using our division, regime Superman said, his tactical mind processing the assault patterns. Waited until Diana and Barry defected. Until you exposed the rehabilitation centers. Until the regime's authority was questioned. He's conquering Earth while we're fighting each other, the Visitor finished. Proving that both our approaches fail when faced with real tyranny. That idealistic freedom and authoritarian security both crumble before someone who just wants to burn everything and rule the ashes. Their eyes met across the fortress. And in that moment, 5 years of philosophical difference became irrelevant compared to the immediate threat. Darkseid didn't care about rehabilitation versus inspiration, security versus freedom, control versus hope. He cared about conquest, anti-life equation, reducing all existence to extensions of his will. Against that ultimate evil, Superman, any Superman, every Superman, had one role: stand between tyranny and those who couldn't defend themselves. Temporary truce. The Visitor offered. Until Darkseid's gone, regime Superman agreed. Then we finished the conversation about what I've become and what I should do about it. They launched from the fortress together. Two Supermen flying towards separate battlefronts. The Visitor to Metropolis, where Diana and the insurgency were already engaging parademons. Regime Superman to Gotham, where his enforcers struggled against Fury assault. No alliance, just parallel purpose. No agreement about Earth's future. Just shared recognition that Earth needed a future to argue about. Behind them, Lois's photograph watched from the fortress. Her captured smile a reminder that some choices couldn't wait. Some redemptions couldn't be delayed. Some questions demanded answers before invasion made them irrelevant. The war for Superman's soul would have to pause while Superman saved the world. Again, together, proving that even gods divided by philosophy could unite against evil that transcended debate. Darkseid's laugh echoed across the battlefield as two Supermen arrived to challenge his conquest. The Lord of Apocalypse had calculated their every move, anticipated their every strategy, prepared for their every strength. He'd watched Superman fall to tyranny and remained unimpressed, amateur, authoritarianism compared to his eternal mastery. Now he would teach Earth what real control looked like, what true power demanded, what absolute domination achieved. And Superman, both Supermen, mirror and original, symbol and corruption, would have to prove that hope wasn't just philosophical abstraction, but actual force capable of standing against the universe's darkest god. The battle for Earth's survival had begun. The question of Earth's soul would have to wait. Metropolis burned with the fires of apocalypse. Its gleaming towers, symbols of Superman's protection, transformed into targets of Darkseid's contempt, crumbling under Parade Mon. Assault and fury coordination. The visitor arrived to find Diana already in the thick of combat, her sword carving through endless waves of attackers with Amazon precision, while Green Arrow and his cell provided covering. Fire from rooftop positions. Black Canary's sonic scream scattered Parade Mon formations. Harley Quinn fought with manic joy that masked tactical brilliance. And everywhere, civilians trapped between invasion and crossfire screamed for the salvation they'd been promised. About time, Diana shouted, bisecting 3 parademons with a single sword stroke while her bracers deflected Omega beam fire from a hovering fury. Darkseid's forces are overwhelming the regime's defenses. They're targeting rehabilitation centers and surveillance infrastructure, studying Superman's methods while destroying his power base. The visitor didn't waste time on response. He dove into the battle with Kryptonian fury, heat vision carving through Parade Mon swarms, super breath creating cyclones that scattered attackers. Every movement calculated to protect civilians first and engage enemies second. This was Superman at his purest, not ruling, not controlling, but fighting beside humanity against threats they couldn't face alone. Inspiring through action rather than compelling through authority. A building collapsed nearby, its support structure compromised by Parade Mon explosives. The visitor moved faster than thought, catching the structure mid-fall and holding tons of steel and concrete aloft while terrified families evacuated. Diana appeared beside him, her divine strength adding to his as they carefully lowered the building into an empty lot rather than letting it crush the street below. Together, she said, and the word carried weight beyond the immediate crisis. They'd fought together before the regime, partners who'd trusted each other's judgment and complemented each other's strengths. That partnership had fractured when she'd chosen loyalty to Clark over truth. Now, facing invasion, they were remembering what Justice League meant. Heroes operating as equals rather than enforcers serving a god. Together, the visitor agreed, and they launched back into battle as the cohesive unit they'd once been. Across the planet in Gotham, regime Superman engaged Kalibak in the ruins of Crime Alley, symbolic location for a battle between tyrants of different philosophies. The new god swung his beta club with savage precision, each blow carrying enough force to shatter mountains. Regime Superman matched him strike for strike, but 5 years of ruling rather than fighting had dulled his combat instincts. He'd grown accustomed to enemies who surrendered before battle began, to threats that evaporated under the weight of his authority. Kalibak didn't surrender. Kalibak didn't fear. Kalibak existed to destroy, and Superman's reputation meant nothing to Darkseid's son. You call yourself a conqueror? Kalibak laughed, his voice carrying the contempt of someone raised on apocalypse. You're a child playing at Dominion. My father has ruled for eons, has crushed civilizations you can't imagine, has perfected tyranny while you were still pretending mercy mattered. The Beta Club caught Superman across the jaw, actually staggering him. Darkseid will teach you what real power looks like. Regime Superman recovered, wiping blue blood from his lip with shock. He couldn't remember the last time something had made him bleed. The reminder of vulnerability enraged and terrified him equally. He responded with heat vision at maximum intensity, the beams carving molten trenches through Gotham streets as Kalibak dodged with surprising agility for someone his size. Flash arrived in a crackle of yellow lightning, his speed allowing him to evacuate civilians from the combat zone faster than the battle could kill them. Little help here, Clark, he shouted, pulling a family from a collapsing building. Kalibak's not alone. Granny Goodness has a Parade Mon army 3 blocks north, and they're converting civilians into more soldiers. The tactical report cut through Regime Superman's combat. Focus. Conversion. Darkseid wasn't just invading, he was recruiting, transforming Earth's population into extensions of Apocalypse's will. The ultimate expression of control. That made the regime's rehabilitation look gentle by comparison. Humans becoming parademons, their personalities completely erased and replaced with mindless obedience to Darkseid's authority. Is that what I've been doing? The thought struck with the force of kryptonite, making people into extensions of my will, erasing personalities that opposed me, becoming Darkseid with better publicity. He shook off the recognition, crisis first, existential horror later, and coordinated with Flash. Barry, evacuation priority. Get everyone out of the conversion zone. I'll handle Calabac. He launched forward with renewed purpose, catching the Beta Club mid-swing, and finally engaging, with the combat ferocity he'd suppressed for 5 years of ruling, through intimidation rather than fighting through skill. At the Hall of Justice, Batman coordinated insurgency and regime forces into something, approaching unified defense. The irony wasn't lost on him. Batman, branded terrorist by the regime, now commanding Superman's enforcers because invasion rendered political differences irrelevant. Cyborg maintained communication networks despite his conflicted loyalty, his mechanical components prioritizing survival over philosophy, and scattered across the planet. Heroes who'd chosen different sides in the regime debate fought shoulder to shoulder against the new god threat. All units, Darkseid's strategy is clear. Batman's voice transmitted across every frequency. He's not trying to fight us. He's trying to break us. Make us choose between defending cities and preventing conversion, between saving lives and preserving infrastructure, between immediate rescue and long-term survival. His tactical mind processed 1,000 variables simultaneously. We can't win by playing his game. We need to change the battlefield. How? Green Arrow demanded, firing explosive arrows into Parademon swarms while covering Black Canary's evacuation efforts. We're outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Darkseid's forces have boom tube mobility. Every minute we spend fighting here, they're conquering somewhere else. We go for the head, Batman said coldly. Find Darkseid. Both Supermen hit him simultaneously. Diana provides support. Flash evacuates civilians from the immediate blast zone. We end this war before it becomes occupation. That's suicide, Cyborg objected. Darkseid is exactly what Superman became, Batman interrupted. A god who believes absolute power justifies any action. The difference is, Darkseid's honest about what he is. He doesn't pretend tyranny is love or control is compassion. He just conquers and destroys and moves on. His voice hardened, which means Superman, our Superman, the one who still remembers what hope means, has to prove that inspiration can defeat domination, that the symbol still matters even when the easier path is submission. The visitor heard the transmission through insurgency channels as he and Diana cleared the final Parademon swarms from Metropolis's downtown. Bruce is right, he said, addressing both Diana and his counterpart through open communication. We can fight these forces forever and lose slowly, or we can challenge Darkseid directly and lose quickly. But there's a third option. We remind him why Earth has repelled every invasion, why this planet produces heroes instead of victims, why humanity keeps surprising gods who think conquest is inevitable, which is regime. Superman's voice came through, exhausted but engaged. We fight together, the visitor said simply, not as regime and insurgency, not as tyrant and symbol, but as what we should have been all along. Superman, complete, unified, choosing hope over control even when control seems safer, proving that the S means something more than security through submission. Silence on the line. Then regime. Superman's response, carrying the weight of recognition. Meet me at Ground Zero, where Darkseid will make his stand, and we'll show him what Superman actually means. The two Kryptonians converged on the crater that had once been Metropolis's heart, the exact location where 7 million people had died 5 years ago, where Superman had killed Lois and the Joker had won, and everything had fractured into regime and insurgency. Darkseid stood there waiting, his massive form radiating power that dwarfed even Kryptonian might. He'd chosen this location deliberately, knowing its symbolic weight, understanding that making Superman fight in his greatest tragedy would break whatever resolve remained. Superman. Darkseid's voice carried the timbre of ancient evil. Superman, I should say? How delightful. One who broke and became almost worthy of respect. One who remained naive and believes hope conquers all. Both about to learn that Darkseid is. His Omega beams charged. The red energy of absolute destruction. I've conquered 1,000 worlds. broken 1 million heroes, reduced civilizations to ash and their populations to parademons. What makes you think Earth will be different? Because Earth has us, the visitor said, positioning himself beside his counterpart, too. Supermen standing together for the first time, mirror and original unified in purpose, if not philosophy. Because Earth breeds heroes, regime Superman added. And his voice carried a conviction he'd lost 5 years ago. Humans who refuse to submit, even when submission would be easier. Who choose freedom over security. Who believe, stupidly and stubbornly and beautifully, that they deserve to govern themselves, rather than be ruled by gods. He met Darkseid's gaze without flinching. I forgot that. Convinced myself they needed control. Became what you are, a tyrant who calls conquest protection. But standing here, in the place where everything broke, facing someone who's actually honest about being evil, his heat vision began to glow. I remember what I should have been. Words Darkseid dismissed. I've heard them before. Heroes proclaiming principles before they crumble under absolute power. You're no different. You already broke once, regime Superman. Already proved that one tragedy shatters supposed paragons. I'm simply here to finish what the Joker started. The Joker's dead, regime Superman said. And the Superman who killed him is dying too, being replaced by someone who remembers. That hope isn't weakness, it's the hardest choice. The bravest path. The thing that makes us heroes instead of tyrants. He glanced at his mirror. Ready? Always, the visitor replied. They launched simultaneously. Two Kryptonians moving in perfect synchronization despite never training together. Their shared biology and parallel purpose creating instant coordination. Darkseid met them with omega beams that carved reality itself. The red energy forcing both Supermen to dodge with superhuman reflexes. The impact craters where the beams struck showed what would happen if they connected, complete. Molecular disintegration, erasure from existence. Darkseid's signature method of eliminating opposition. But Superman was faster. Both Supermen were faster. They wove through impossible attack patterns. Heat vision responding to omega beams. Freeze breath countering Darkseid's strength. Coordinated strikes. Forcing the new god onto defensive footing for the first time in eons. This wasn't individual heroes challenging tyranny. This was the symbol of hope. Fully realized, doubled. Unified in recognition that some evils transcended philosophical differences. Diana arrived with the remaining Justice League forces, the fractured heroes who'd spent 5 years on opposite sides of the regime debate now fighting as the team they'd once been. Green Lantern constructs contained Parade Mon reinforcements. Flash evacuated civilians faster than Darkseid's forces could convert them. Cyborg coordinated global defenses while simultaneously trying to jam boom tube frequencies. Black Canary's sonic scream disrupted Fury communications. Even Harley Quinn's tactical chaos created openings in enemy formations. And Batman watched from his command center, orchestrating the symphony of heroism with the same genius that had kept the insurgency alive for 5 years. All units, the Supermen are creating an opening. Diana, support their assault. How? Contain the Furies. Barry, be ready to evacuate everyone when this gets catastrophic, because it will get catastrophic. The battle raged with the fury of gods determining humanity's fate. Darkseid, ancient and terrible, demonstrating why he'd conquered 1,000 worlds through pure power and absolute certainty. The Supermen, mirror and original, proving that Earth bred different heroes, ones who chose inspiration over domination, even when domination would be easier. But Darkseid had calculated for their strength, had planned for their unity, had prepared for everything except one variable. Regime Superman's willingness to sacrifice. Visitor. Regime Superman transmitted through Kryptonian frequency only they could hear. I know what needs to be done. What should have been done 5 years ago when I executed the Joker instead of facing justice. His voice carried weary determination. Darkseid's power source is the Omega effect. It's part of him, woven into his molecular structure. To stop him permanently, someone has to absorb it, contain it, let it burn through them until it's exhausted. That's suicide, the visitor replied, horror dawning. Clark, no. It's redemption, regime Superman corrected. It's proving that Superman means sacrifice, not dominion. that the symbol demands we give everything, including our lives, to protect people we have no right to rule. His heat vision intensified, matching Darkseid's Omega beams perfectly and creating an opening. Tell Diana I'm sorry. Tell Barry I should have listened. Tell Bruce he was right about everything. His expression held peace, for the first time in 5 years. And tell Earth that Superman can mean hope again. You'll show them. Be what I should have been. Before the visitor could respond, Regime Superman launched forward at full speed, catching Darkseid mid-attack and driving them both into the crater's depths. Omega energy erupted in blinding intensity as Regime Superman absorbed the beams directly, letting them burn through invulnerable flesh and Kryptonian cells, containing destruction meant to erase planets. The visitor tried to follow, tried to share the burden, but Diana caught him with Amazon strength. Let him do this, she said, tears streaming down her immortal face. Let him prove he remembers what being Superman means, what it's always meant, that when the choice is between our lives and their freedom, we choose their freedom, every time, no matter the cost. The crater blazed with red energy as Regime Superman burned from within, Omega effect consuming him cell by cell while he held Darkseid in an unbreakable grip. The new god struggled, shocked by sacrifice he couldn't comprehend. Why would someone with godlike power choose death when ruling was possible? Why embrace martyrdom when tyranny offered immortality? Because that's what heroes do, Regime Superman said, his voice carrying across the battlefield even as his body disintegrated. We don't rule. We inspire. We don't control. We protect. We don't demand worship. We earn trust. His eyes found the visitor one last time. Be better than I was. Show them what Superman means. The Omega energy peaked, then collapsed inward, Darkseid and Regime Superman vanishing in an implosion that sealed the crater and eliminated both gods from reality. The Parademon armies, suddenly leaderless, scattered in confusion. The Furies, lacking Darkseid's coordination, retreated through boom tubes. And Earth, bloodied but unbroken, stood victorious against invasion. Through sacrifice of the Tyrant who'd learned heroism too late. The visitor stood at the crater's edge, staring at the place where his mirror had chosen redemption. 5 years of tyranny couldn't be erased. Thousands of people whose personalities had been destroyed couldn't be restored. The regime's scars would haunt Earth for generations. But in the end, Regime Superman had remembered what the symbol meant, had proven that even gods corrupted by grief could choose differently when the moment demanded it. Diana placed a hand on his shoulder. He died a hero, she said quietly. Not the tyrant he'd become, but the hero he'd been, the symbol he should have remained. He died proving the Joker was wrong, the visitor added. That one bad day doesn't have to define you. That you can break and heal rather than break and spread the fracture. That Superman means hope even after everything that tries to kill it. Batman's voice came through the communication network, addressing the entire planet, citizens of Earth. The invasion has been repelled. Darkseid is defeated. And Superman, our Superman, the one who built the regime, gave his life to protect the freedom he'd spent 5 years taking away. His sacrifice doesn't erase what he did, doesn't resurrect the executed or restore the rehabilitated, but it proves that redemption is possible, that even after becoming our greatest threat, Superman could still be our greatest hero. The visitor rose into the sky, cape billowing in smoke and ash, his symbol catching light as the battle's fires died. He'd crossed dimensions to challenge tyranny. He'd inspired Diana and Barry to defect. He'd exposed the regime's horrors and forced his counterpart to face what he'd become. And in the end, he'd witnessed redemption purchased with sacrifice, the most Superman resolution possible. What now? Diana asked, flying beside him as they surveyed Metropolis's ruins. Now we rebuild, the visitor said. Not the regime, not the systems that concentrated power in one person's hands, but genuine democracy, messy and difficult and prone to failure, but allowing humanity to govern itself, to choose its own path, to prove that people don't need gods making every decision, they need inspiration, showing them what's possible. Will you stay? She asked. Help us rebuild what Clark destroyed. The visitor considered. He had a universe to return to, a life that continued beyond this dimension's drama. But Earth needed a Superman who remembered what hope meant. Needed proof that the symbol could survive tyranny's corruption. Needed him. For a while, he decided. Until you have systems in place to prevent another regime. Until civilian government is restored and rehabilitation centers are closed and surveillance is dismantled. Until Earth remembers how to be free. He met Diana's grateful gaze. Then I'll return home. But I'll never forget this world. This battle. What your Clark became and what he chose to be in the end. Below them, citizens emerged from shelters and ruins. Their faces reflecting shock, grief, hope, uncertainty. They'd lived 5 years under perfect peace, purchased with freedom. They'd witnessed invasion repelled through heroic sacrifice. And now they faced the terrifying, beautiful possibility of governing themselves again. The visitor descended to street level, helping a family from rubble with the gentle strength that had always defined Superman. Around him, Diana coordinated rescue efforts. Flash evacuated the injured. Green Lantern reconstructed critical infrastructure. Batman coordinated the transition from regime to civilian authority. And everywhere, heroes who'd been divided by philosophy united in purpose, protecting people who deserve the chance to fail and grow rather than be frozen in perfect, sterile safety. The regime had fallen. Darkseid had been defeated. And Superman, both Supermen, Mirror and Original, Tyrant and Symbol, had proven that hope wasn't naive. That believing in humanity despite all evidence to the contrary wasn't weakness but the bravest possible choice. That the S meant sacrifice, not dominion. Inspiration, not control. The possibility that even after the darkest night, dawn still came if you fought for it. Somewhere in the fortress of solitude, Lois's photograph smiled at empty halls, her captured expression suggesting she'd known all along. Clark would remember, eventually, when it mattered most, that Superman wasn't defined by his worst moment but by weather. He chose to rise above it. And in another universe, the visitor would return with stories of a world that had lost its way and found it again, of tyranny born from grief and ended through sacrifice, of the eternal struggle between control and hope, security and freedom, the easy path and the right one. But for now, he had work to do, people to save, systems to rebuild, a planet to heal. Because that's what Superman did. Not rule, but inspire. Not control, but protect. Not demand worship, but earn trust through actions that proved. The symbol meant something worth dying for. The sun rose over Metropolis's ruins, painting devastation in gold and possibility. The regime's towers were gone, but humanity remained. Broken but unbowed, scarred but learning, free to choose their path forward, for better or worse. With Superman standing beside them rather than above them. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. And on this earth, after 5 years of darkness, hope was finally allowed to shine again. The visitor remained on Injustice Earth for 3 months, working alongside Diana, Barry, and the Reformed Justice League to dismantle the regime's infrastructure and restore civilian governance. Rehabilitation centers were closed, and their victims given genuine psychological care rather than thought control. Surveillance systems were dismantled or placed under democratic oversight, with strict legal limitations. Political prisoners were freed, their names restored, their lives rebuilt as much as possible after trauma the world would never fully heal from. Batman's insurgency transformed into Earth's interim government, with Bruce reluctantly accepting leadership until proper elections could be organized. He spent his nights processing the impossible reality that Clark had died a hero after living 5 years as a tyrant. Diana trained the next generation of heroes, teaching them that power demands accountability, and strength without wisdom is just tyranny with divine sanction. Flash ran himself ragged, evacuating lingering apocalypse threats and reconnecting separated families. And the visitor worked with civilian leadership to create constitutional safeguards against future regimes. No hero with godlike power could override democratic processes, no matter how benevolent their intentions. Systems of checks and balances designed to prevent one person, one being, one Superman from ever again deciding that control was love. When the dimensional breach reopened, 3 months later, the monitors calculated. Intervention complete. Earth gathered to say farewell to the Superman who'd reminded them what the symbol meant. Diana presented him with a memorial, two statues in Metropolis's rebuilt square, both wearing the S shield, one representing the regime's Superman who'd fallen to tyranny, one representing the hero he'd been and became again in his final moments. So people remember, Diana explained, that Superman can break, that grief can breed tyranny, that even gods with the best intentions can become monsters, but also that redemption is possible, that sacrifice can prove the Joker wrong, that hope survives even after the darkest night. The visitors stood before the statues, one a warning, one an inspiration, and felt the weight of what this earth had endured. In my universe, he said to the gathered crowd, people sometimes ask if Superman is too powerful, if someone with godlike abilities can ever truly be democratic, if the symbol creates dependency rather than inspiration. He gestured to the statues. Your world learned the hard answer, that Superman's power is only as good as Superman's choices, that the symbol means nothing if the person wearing it forgets its responsibility. Will you tell them? A civilian asked Elena Rodriguez, the mother who defended the regime's peace, now working with civilian government to ensure her children grew up free. Will you tell your Earth what happened here? So they learn from our mistakes without having to live them. I will, the visitor promised. I'll tell them about Clark Kent who broke and rebuilt the world as his cage. About Diana Prince who chose truth over loyalty when it mattered most. About Barry Allen who found courage to oppose a god. About Bruce Wayne who held the line for 5 years against impossible odds. And about an Earth that proved humanity can survive both invasion and protection, can endure both Darkseid's conquest and Superman's control, and still choose freedom. He rose into the air, cape catching the light, the symbol blazing with the hope this Earth was learning to feel again. Remember this, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the rebuilt city. Power doesn't corrupt, fear of loss does. Control isn't love, trust is. And Superman means sacrifice, not dominion. Inspiration, not rule. The belief that even after losing everything, even after becoming the villain, you can still choose to be the hero again. The dimensional breach pulled him homeward, leaving behind an Earth forever changed by 30 seconds difference. 5 years tyranny, and one choice to sacrifice rather than subjugate. The regime would scar their history forever. But so would the redemption. The proof that even gods corrupted by grief could remember what the symbol demanded. And in the rubble of Metropolis's heart, where 7 million had died and 2 supermen had finally understood each other, fresh flowers appeared daily, placed by citizens who remembered that hope, fragile and difficult and dangerous as it was, remained worth fighting for, even when fighting meant opposing Superman himself.